The world's global temperature plummets by 100 degrees Celsius and the Earth enters into an ice age era. Over a staggering 85% of the world's population die frozen. And after weeks of freezing, the world experiences a shutdown of all its infrastructure overnight. The protagonist of this story, Han Feng, is the only one able to sit at home with water and electricity, enjoying a glass of premium wine by the boiler. Neighbors in the homeowner housing complex residents chat group began to complain. In this extreme cold, people are sure to freeze to death. And even if they don't freeze, they'll starve. But Han Feng has stockpiled enough supplies to last him 10 lifetimes before the apocalypse arrived. And this was all possible because Han Feng died and had been reborn 17 days before the apocalypse. At this moment, a reporter on the news warns everyone to stay inside as the temperature continued to drop with no signs of stopping. But everyone shouldn't give up hope because the government hasn't forgotten about them. As long as they unite and stand together, they will overcome this crisis. This news was cut off mid-speech as a plane freezes in mid-air and crashes right into the unfortunate reporter, killing him instantly. And the entire ordeal was broadcast on any television still working. Meanwhile, inside a building stocked with rations and almost frozen foods, someone with silent footsteps was creeping around with a bloody iron bat. The person was the tenant of the apartment, Han Feng. Suddenly, a female voice calls his name from outside his apartment. So as Han Feng peeps through the hole in his door, he was surprised to see his school friend and crush, Lee Hyona, a young blonde baddie with a 38D melons and crazy curves that could render any man into having salacious thoughts. And her current victim was Han Feng. Hyona was shivering in the cold, tears in her eyes, knocking on Han Feng's door. Han Feng, blushing profusely, immediately opens his door. It's already deadly cold, so as Han Feng asks what Hyona was doing at his place, he also tells her to come inside, reminding her that it was dangerous and freezing outside. However, upon entering midway, Hyona suddenly grabbed the door and kissed Han Feng on the mouth. Han Feng was in a daze, and before he could understand what was going on, Hyona started playing with her tongue, then continued to suck Han Feng dry with her mouth. This continued for quite a few minutes. However, as soon as the deed was done, a bewildered Han Feng, wiping his drool from his mouth, questioned what's gotten into Hyona. She kissed him the second he opened the door. Hyona, with a seductive tone, whispered that she realized Han Feng was the only one she loved all along, and that act just now was the declaration of her love. You're the only one I'm supposed to be with. And as the saying goes, it takes a near-death experience like this crisis to see a person's true colors, to see who they really are. Someone who would be there for you no matter what. Hyona said this in a hopeful and seductive voice, rendering Han Feng speechless at those words. He couldn't believe his goddess was finally noticing him as more than just a loser. He was so shocked that he just stood there, frozen on the spot and not responding. Seeing this, Hyona gently grabbed Han Feng's hand and placed it on her 38D bouncy melons, then whispered in Han Feng's ear, telling him that if he didn't believe her, he should feel her heartbeat. Also, she continued that she was willing to do anything. And I mean anything that Han Feng wanted. Anything? This sudden revelation shook Han Feng's world. His heart was beating faster than his brain could comprehend what was happening. Is this really happening, or is it all a dream? As Han Feng was lost in his thoughts, Hyona decided to make the first move herself. So with her hand seductively placed on Han Feng's ass, her leg was also placed in between his legs as well. Hyona then started to slowly rub Han Feng's hot iron rod, over and over again. At that moment, Han Feng started to vibrate like an old tractor's engine. His heart felt like it was about to explode at any given second. He finally replied that Hyona had no idea how much her words meant to him. And as he tried to continue, Hyona gently grabbed his face, whispering and insisting he needn't say anything. She knows and understands his true feelings for her. And now, Han Feng knows hers as well. She requested Han Feng to close his eyes because she had a gift for him. As soon as Han Feng did, someone grabbed the door, and with all the might the person could muster, he smashed Han Feng's head. Blood splattered everywhere. And as blood continued to gush out from Han Feng's head, Hyona and her real boyfriend checked out the supplies Han Feng had in his apartment. Meanwhile, Han Feng, lying on the deadly cold floor, started to go numb. He was unable to move his arms, his entire body, and slowly his vision became blurry. He couldn't believe this was the gift Hyona was referring to. I mean, how the fuck is this a gift? And to make matters even worse, Hyona and her boyfriend decided to get all nasty right in front of him. This was the reward Hyona was going to receive for her Oscar-worthy performance earlier. Her boyfriend said. Han Feng couldn't believe what he was seeing. To him, they were like devils. Han Feng swore that if there was a next life, He will never be a bootlicker again. Then, suddenly, something strange happened. Through the darkness, Han Feng saw a flicker of light ahead of him, and somehow he was being pulled towards it. As he got closer, the light began to shine brighter and brighter. Han Feng felt its warmth too. He extended his hand, reaching for it. He thought it was the path which will lead him to heaven. However, as soon as Han Feng touched the light, it turned red, and suddenly, Han Feng's entire soul started to burn. Then, his soul started shredding into pieces, his screams echoing the silent abyss. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, Han Feng woke up, covered in sweat and completely exhausted. The first thing Han Feng saw and immediately felt was the warm sunlight coming through the window. Huh? Where am I? Han Feng was in a state of confusion as he continued to stare outside through his apartment window, and just like that, 30 minutes passed by like a bullet. Han Feng stood up, went to his balcony, and once again, he continued to bask in the warmth of the sun. He never thought in a million years that he would ever feel this warmth again. Han Feng had checked the date. It was June 28th, and based on his memory from his previous life, the apocalypse onset was on July 15th, 17 days from now. And although he was supposed to be dead, for some mysterious reason, he came back in time, just enough time before the apocalypse. This also meant he'd been reborn. His desperate wish was granted in his final moments. But enough about that, he thought. There was something strange happening with Han Feng's body, specifically his hand. Ever since he woke up, his right hand was continuously glowing red, and he had no clue what it was or how to make it stop. According to Han Feng, it also didn't hurt or anything. It just felt a little bit warm, and as it doesn't seem to do anything, Han Feng thought he was imagining things at the beginning. But then, in the middle of his thoughts, a heavy sneeze came out of him. When he opened his eyes, his red, glowing hand had changed to green. Huh? What's going on? In addition, the green glow became bigger and bigger, freaking the shit out of him. Wasn't it troublesome enough that his right hand started glowing red? But now it was green. Seriously, what the actual fuck is going on? Han Feng became frustrated and confused with the beams of light shooting out of his hand. He wondered how science could justify his glowing color-changing right hand. Soon after, the green glow shrunk in size, and it seemed like Han Feng could change the intensity of the green glow with his will, something he couldn't do with the red glow. But after a few minutes of failing to snuff out his glowing right hand, another serious issue came up. He immediately sat on his sofa as his legs gave out. Han Feng started feeling like all his energy was leaving his body. He felt completely drained. Wait, is this because of the green light? Growing more and more frustrated, Han Feng shook his hand violently, trying to stop it from glowing. Damn it! What the hell is this thing? But suddenly his eyes widened when a thought came to his mind. Hang on a sec. What if I got a superpower? You know, like a cheat skill in manhwas that the protagonist of the story always seems to get. Well, no shit, my friend. With this newfound theory, Han Feng grabbed a kitchen knife, thinking if he held a weapon, some reaction might happen. But nothing happened. Oh, come on. Seriously, but wait. Something did happen as his stomach started to growl, making him feel like he would pass out any moment if he didn't eat something. Feeling defeated, he went to his fridge, and as he opened it to find something to eat, he realized that the entire fridge was empty. This was bad. If I don't eat something soon, I'm gonna pass out and probably die out of hunger. But at that very moment, Han Feng noticed a jar full of roasted soybeans. He remembered that it was a leftover snacks he had from before the apocalypse. And although it wasn't exactly a full meal, he was desperate. I mean, what else could he do? He decided to eat it first, and then go to the supermarket later. Han Feng slowly grabbed a soybean and tossed it into his mouth immediately after. A loud boom happened a second after. It was the soybean which had exploded in Han Feng's face, making the area all seem like a scene from a comic book. As the smoke cleared, there was fresh soybean plant in Han Feng's mouth. Confused, he pulled the mysterious plant out of his mouth and noticed it was a fresh plant of a soybean. Also, he wasn't feeling tired or drained anymore. And the green light was gone too. Did it have something to do with the soybeans? Now Han Feng was really confused. He plucked one soybean from the plant in his hand, and upon opening it, he was utterly stunned to see fresh soybeans inside. Ah, so this is my power. What an incredible discovery. I need to study it some more, but right now I have bigger fish to fry. I need to stock up on supplies before the world ends. Outside, the weather was very moderate as birds were chirping non-stop, and the buzzing crowd was evident to see. Soon all this will be ancient history, Han Feng thought. He was in the crowd, thinking about everything that had transpired. Okay, so let me get this straight. First, there was a red glow around my hand. Then it turned green. Then the green glow shrinks and grows, making my heartbeat faster and feel super tired. Then, the soybean I touched with my glowing green hand became a bean sprouts. What kind of power is this? After his recount, Han Feng was still confused and growing frustrated again. In the middle of his thoughts, an angelic voice called his name from behind. So as Han Feng stopped and turned back, well, it was none other than Miss 38D Melons, Lee Hyona. She was wearing a beautiful dress and looking absolutely gorgeous. Once again, with a seductive voice, she said, "What a coincidence to meet like this. It's like the heavens are trying to bring us closer." Heavens? Yeah, right? Han Feng looked like he'd seen a ghost. After the incident, it seems Han Feng was now seeing her under a different lens. Lee Hyona, the goddess of his dreams for 3 long years. Han Feng had done everything to make her happy, even though he knew he was a loser, a fallback guy for her. But Han Feng never in a million years thought that this two-faced bitch would end up killing him. He was furious. His whole body was trembling with uncontrolled rage. Realizing this, Han Feng calms himself. Now's not the time for revenge. Not yet. After all, revenge is a dish best served cold. He needed to secure supplies first. In the middle of his thoughts, Hyona called Han Feng's name numerous times, but Han Feng was lost in his own world, thinking. Hyona, pretending to be worried, asked if Han Feng was okay. Why is he spacing out? Han Feng, with a nervous smile, politely explained that Hyona was looking beautiful today, so her beauty made him space out. This compliment made Hyona blush, but right after that, a knowing smile crept on her lips, making her quite smug and also revealing who she really was. She continued her angelic act with a weird, seductive voice, offering that they go do some shopping together now that they've run into each other. But Han Feng just straight up declines and left, saying he couldn't go today. Hyona was speechless at what just happened. She couldn't believe Han Feng would be on the path of a bootlicker counterattack. How could this bootlicker reject my offer? Meanwhile, Han Feng was proud of himself. He saw through Hyona's intention to use him as her personal ATM. After a while, Han Feng finally reached his desired destination, Waldemar, the city's Walmart, and also the largest and most well-stocked supermarket in the East region. When the Ice Age hit, this place was cleaned out overnight, and nobody found out who was responsible. Han Feng had decided to stock up as much as he could before the apocalypse. With the aid of the internet, Han Feng searched for a survival guide for the ice apocalypse. He found a list of things he needed, which included food, winter clothes, medicines, and all the other necessary supplies and steps. But right now, the biggest problem was that Han Feng didn't have the money to stock up on all the supplies on the list. And although he had the ability to grow food, what good is it if he didn't have the food to grow in the first place? He was once again frustrated. Han Feng started cursing with any vile thing he could think of. But suddenly, a familiar notification sound prompted him to check his phone. And when he did, he was startled. It was a message about a personal loan. Since Han Feng's credit score was great, he was eligible for a loan. Seeing this, a great idea immediately came to mind. Han Feng began to install every app that give personal loans. He smirked, knowing that there were plenty of ways to get a loan, and he wouldn't have to pay it back after the apocalypse, as money would be nothing but a useless piece of paper. Meanwhile, on the streets, a can was kicked by someone in a not-so-gentle way. The person was no other than Hyona. She was absolutely furious with his bootlicker. Hyona was still stuck up on the fact that a loser like Han Feng ignored her. Han Feng was just one of her many simps, so how dare he denies her? A pathetic loser who didn't even have his own car. Hyona swore she would never play nice with Han Feng again. But at that moment, a car horn startled her. So when she turned her head to the side, the car also stopped beside her. As the SUV's window lowered, Hyona was surprised to see Han Feng inside. He even waved at her. Dumbfounded, Hyona couldn't believe her eyes. She questioned if the SUV belongs to Han Feng. Yeah, I just got it, Han Feng said with a smile. He then continued that his dad had been killing it in his business in the US, so he wired him some money a few hours ago. He also just dropped his dad off at the airport. Hyona was still processing all this. After realizing Han Feng was a great human wallet to have, Hyona's entire personality did a 180. She immediately got all emotional and sentimental, crying and apologizing, saying she was really sorry for asking Han Feng to go shopping with her that morning, when he was going to pick up his dad from the airport. Hyona then made a cute and sorrowful face as she wipes off her fake tears. She played the victim card, saying Han Feng was really cold towards her, that she thought maybe he was ditching her, his best friend. Silly girl. Han Feng's entire demeanor changed when he said this. He was more confident and seductive. He gently grabbed Hyona's waist, pulled her close, and while holding her chin delicately, he said, "Why would I ever ditch you? Hyona, you're the most important person in the world to me." Again, that mischievous, knowing smile crept on her lips once more, showing her true nature. Then, the Oscar-worthy performance was once more on display. Hyona pretended to be all shy, then cast her gaze on the ground and said that Han Feng was also very special to her. Hyona then proceeds to ask, why don't they go watch a movie and have dinner together at a high-end restaurant? Hyona lifts her head up and asks what Han Feng thought about her suggestion. However, to her surprise, Han Feng was already gone. Huh? Where did he go? The noise behind her made her turn back, and when she did, Han Feng was assembling all the supplies in the back of his SUV. He explained that he still had to carry all the stuff upstairs, so he can't today. He was obviously busy. Even though Hyona was furious hearing this, she politely asked, "Why did you buy so much stuff? What's inside the boxes?" Han Feng casually explains that they were nothing special, just some stuff he likes. That's all. Then, feigning excitement, Han Feng said he also got a special gift for Hyona, and once he's less busy, they will meet up. This made Hyona extremely happy, so as she turned to leave, she made mention that she was really looking forward to the gift. Hyona also said that she was heading home. Hearing this, Han Feng nonchalantly replied that she better do just that. With her back turned, Hyona reverted to her true self, pleased. She was quite satisfied with herself, thinking she'd nailed it and got a great wallet at her disposal. On the other hand, Han Feng stole a cold glance from behind him, thinking he couldn't let Hyona find out about his little stockpiling. It's his ticket to surviving the apocalypse, after all. Han Feng couldn't wait to turn Hyona's world into a living nightmare when the apocalypse hits. She and the guy that helped in killing him. Han Feng's expression turned sinister, like that of a grim reaper. He was actually starting to look forward to the apocalypse. The days rolled by and just like that, bam! July 15th, the day the apocalypse arrives. But before that there was heavy snow first. Then, the temperature eventually plummets to minus 20 degrees Celsius. Over the next month, the temperature will continue to drop gradually, reaching a new low of minus 70 degrees Celsius. By that time, the world will be encased in ice and snow, making it impossible to go outside. That's why Han Feng had to prepare before that very day. He needs to stock up on enough food supplies, but he couldn't let his neighbors suspect his sudden hoarding. So Han Feng had his packages sealed in hazardous boxes, and the sensitive supplies like medical supplies are moved by Han Feng at night when no one's around. So with those issues sorted, the next issue was electricity. After the apocalypse hits, the power grid will be extremely unstable. So Han Feng got a generator and enough fuel to keep it running for at least a year. Also, the heating system will stop when the apocalypse hit, so Han Feng modified his house for independent heating, and also reinforced his doors and windows while he was at it. He also dedicated an entire room for storing his supplies too. By the time he finished getting everything ready, it was already July 14th, and the beginning of the apocalypse was the very next day. Finally, it was time for the main event, and thus, discovering the mystery behind how his power works. Han Feng knew that to survive in the upcoming Ice Age apocalypse, relying solely on the supplies he'd accumulated won't be enough. He needed a long-term solution, and the key was to find out more about his power to manipulate plants. After all, it was his last hope. Han Feng had cooked the soybeans he grew and decided to eat them to check if they were edible. Staring nervously at his spoon full of cooked soybeans, Han Feng was hesitant, and rightfully so. He had no clue what to expect if he eats it, but Han Feng knew that if he didn't try, he would never know. And with his ability acting so random, it was difficult to figure out its triggers. So as he takes a deep breath, Han Feng took a bite, and to his surprise, it was edible. And not only that, it also tasted just like any normal soybean. In fact, it was extremely delicious that Han Feng finished half his plate before he even realized it. After the confirmation that he can now produce food, the next step Han Feng thought was to figure out how this ability of his actually worked. So far, he'd only tried it on soybeans. Han Feng opened his fridge, which was now fully stocked with all kinds of food. He decided to test if his ability also worked on other plants. Hours passed just like that, and before he even realized it, the sun had already set. Han Feng found it difficult to open his eyes, so when he eventually did, he questioned himself if he'd pass out. He was also holding a fresh vegetable in his hand. Han Feng's head was spinning, and he also felt extremely exhausted. Around him were various vegetables and black substances, like a pile of dirt, scattered around him. It seems this power takes a serious toll on his mind and body. So to replenish his lost energy, Han Feng decided to finish his plate. As he was eating, Han Feng was inwardly delighted about the progress he'd made so far. He had learned something new about his ability, so as he continues to stare at his right hand, he recollects his progress. Before Han Feng blacked out earlier, he tried using his power on a bunch of different plants. Some vegetables didn't react at all. Some grew from seeds to full-grown plants, just like the soybean seeds. And some, well, they just exploded in Han Feng's face. But the weird aspect of it was, after the explosion, they turned into a coal-like substance that was extremely light. Seeing this made Han Feng try heating it. Then, voila! He found out that they could be used as regular coal, which made Han Feng extremely pleased with himself. This meant he wouldn't have to worry about a way of staying warm forever. Afterward, he tried many more times, but the success rate was extremely low. However, Han Feng started to notice a pattern. When he remained calm and focused, there was some reaction. So he tried to remain calm and focused when activating his ability. And to his surprise, a fresh broccoli grew instantly in his hand. This was when Han Feng passed out immediately after. Back to the present, Han Feng was contemplating. He couldn't find any significant patterns at all. But he knew deep within him, like a gut feeling, that there was definitely some kind of principle behind how his ability works. Having some understanding of the activating conditions, Han Feng placed the fresh broccoli on his table and sat in the lotus position trying to meditate. He imagined himself out in nature, standing naked, making his mind and body a part of nature. As Han Feng slowly opens his eyes, he was delighted to see that it was a success. It was as he suspected. His ability was directly connected to his consciousness. Han Feng didn't feel like his energy was being drained, and the green glow was a lot calmer and brighter. Then, he decided to use it on a fresh, juicy meat. Han Feng picked out a fresh, juicy meat with his glowing green hand, expecting it to grow, but there was no reaction. He tried meditating while holding it. Again, nothing happened. Then, he remembered when he was meditating, he could sense two distinct colors, and he hadn't even tried using the red color yet. This prompted him to once again close his eyes and try to summon the red light. Several minutes passed by, but nothing happened. Then, finally, after what seems like a while, the red light was activated and started covering the whole piece of meat. Han Feng opened his eyes moments after when he smelled something odd. Immediately upon opening his eyes, he got disgusted. The meat looked spoiled to the extent that just the smell was enough to make him want to puke. He threw the meat on the floor, but after a while, curiosity got the best of him as he came back to check what the meat had really turned into. Han Feng was a little disappointed. Upon close inspection, the meat actually looked like it's been cooked or close to being rotten or something. Seeing this, Han Feng thought to himself, is this all the red light could do? Heat things up like this? No, there has to be more. The meat looked like it had gone through a disintegration process. The word disintegration sparked an idea in Han Feng's head. So he immediately grabbed some soybeans in his right hand, then activated his green light, and in his left hand, he held the meat covered in red light. Han Feng thought if his guess is correct, then the green light represented the evolution of matter, and the red light represented the opposite, which was disintegration. So what if he combined them? As soon as he did, Han Feng exclaimed in surprise. His eyes bulged out like they were about to fall off. The small, low-quality meat grew almost 5 times its size and turned into a premium-looking meat. Dumbfounded, Han Feng was confused about what just happened. He had casually merged both light, not knowing the result would be like this. Also, the soybean in his left hand was gone. Did it merge with the meat? Han Feng checked the meat up close, smelling and tasting it also. But the meat looked, felt, and smelled exactly like a real meat, and was even somehow fresher, like a premium meat. Beaming with excitement, Han Feng decided to try this one more time, but ended up ruining all the meat, which made him beat the floor over and over again in frustration. Having enough, Han Feng thought he will just have to figure it out later. He stared at his glowing hands and thought his day was really productive as he figured out a bit about his abilities. He knew that if he mastered his power, he could become the only man standing at the pinnacle of the imminent apocalyptic world. But just as he was daydreaming, another thought came to mind that froze him on the spot. Han Feng had forgot about weapons. Han Feng immediately packed all the food back into a box. But in the middle of his packing, it started to snow outside. It is here, Han Feng thought. It was finally happening. The apocalypse had started. It was really happening. After that, Han Feng, wearing warm clothes, was walking on the streets, deep in thoughts. In just a few hours, the entire streets were being covered with snow. Han Feng knew the temperature will drop to below 45 within the week. Everyone around him were enjoying the snow, not knowing how disastrous it would become later on. However, Han Feng wasn't bothered about such matter. He needed a gun. And although buying a gun was illegal, Han Feng couldn't even buy one if he tried. He didn't exactly have any connections to get one. Just then, a sharp voice pierced Han Feng's ears. The source of the voice belonged to a young man with an exaggerated fashion style, acting all high and mighty, with no actual work to do. He is always roaming the streets, aimlessly. Everyone knew him as Homeless Joe. But his real name is Li Zi, and the people around him calls him Brother Li. Li Zi lives in the same neighborhood as Han Feng. Li Zi is reputed to be in charge of big construction projects and seems to know everyone around, but the truth is, he doesn't have a proper job. Also, he always claims and acts like he's busy. The only thing he has is some connections with some big shots and even gangsters, and that's the only reason Han Feng thought of him. He was the only man Han Feng knew of who could get guns for him. So with a nervous look, Han Feng called his name, waving as he did so. But when Li Zi turned his head to take a look at Han Feng, his face was filled with annoyance, like he's been interrupted in a huge business meeting. He asked if he knew Han Feng. Han Feng explained that they met a while ago and live in the same neighborhood. Li Zi, acting bored, said he was pretty busy, so Han Feng shouldn't blame him for his bad memory. Anyway, what can I do for you? Then Han Feng immediately looked from side to side, and after confirming that there was no one around, Han Feng came close to Li Zi and whispered in his ear, asking if he's ever dealt with guns. This shocked Li Zi greatly, so he asked why Han Feng needed a gun. Han Feng remained silent for a while, feeling guilty. Seeing Han Feng's silence, Li Zi assumed Han Feng was going to do something illegal with it, so he warned him not to try any funny business. Guns were dangerous, and although he's got connections, he's not going to help Han Feng get entangled with anything dangerous. But Han Feng, on the spot, came up with an excuse. He explains it wasn't what Li Zi was thinking. He only wants it for self-defense. A flashback shows a day not long ago. While Han Feng was riding his bike to work, he ran into an old man who was spitting everywhere, so he spat right on Han Feng's face. Han Feng confronted the old man, insisting he apologize, but the man spat on his face again. This made Han Feng furious, so he gave him a good beating. As the old man left, he said he'd get back at Han Feng. And sure enough, the very next day, the same old man came up with his gang and fucked Han Feng up. Still, to this day, whenever they see Han Feng, a good beating soon followed. Han Feng's life became a living hell. He'd never been so humiliated, so that's why he needed the gun for self-defense. Seeing Li Zi becoming all worked up and angry surprised Han Feng. He didn't expect this cliché story to work, let alone to this degree. Li Zi grabbed Han Feng by the shoulder and told him to say no more. From this moment onwards, his big brother Li got him covered. Li Zi proceeds to tell Han Feng that he would make sure to fulfill his request. Now, Han Feng needs to follow him to the bus stop to hop on one. Li Zi told Han Feng his Mercedes was in service, so they need to make do with the bus service. Han Feng expected this, so he wasn't surprised. Although Li Zi was a big talker and liked to bluff, he's not a bad person. So Han Feng took out the keys to his SUV, telling Li Zi not to worry about it. He had a car. Seeing this, Li Zi couldn't help but be surprised. Soon after, the two were in the SUV, and as Han Feng was driving, Li Zi was really impressed. He didn't think Han Feng was a rich kid. Then, Li Zi took out his phone and started taking and posting pictures on social media, boasting about driving his new car. Finally, after a while, they reached their destination. And from the looks of it, people on the streets were already feeling the cold. They made some fire to warm themselves. As soon as Li Zi got out of the SUV, everyone around came close to him. They were surprised and shocked, asking what business he had doing there. Also, what's with this SUV? How much was it? Hearing this, Li Zi casually said it wasn't something much, just 700 grand, give or take. Meanwhile, Han Feng was speechless hearing this. He thought that it was bold for Li Zi to tell everyone that he owned a car right in front of the actual owner. As they went inside, the boss, who was leisurely sitting on his sofa, asked Li Zi what he was doing at his place at a time like this. Li Zi was a little nervous, so first he offered Boss Lu some cigarette, then introduced Han Feng, saying he wanted to buy a gun. Hearing this, the Boss Lu took a quick look at Han Feng, which sent chills down his spine. That's it. A lousy gun. I thought you were bringing me something interesting, Boss Lu said with a smirk. He then tells one of his men, Xiangzi, to give Han Feng a handgun. The price was 6 grand. Hearing Boss Lu made mention of a handgun, Han Feng, still nervous, asked if he could get something a little longer. You know, like the one with a scope. Hearing this, Boss Lu took a moment to stare at Han Feng, who began to sweat bullets. Then, a loud roar echoed the entire room. Kid, are you asking for a freaking sniper rifle? Do you think this is a fucking shopping mall where you can order anything you want? Just this freaking short one, you say? Take it or leave it. Li Zi, seeing the boss so worked up, immediately came to his side and started telling Han Feng's sad and tragic story. It was something about Han Feng having an ex-wife with 3 kids that wasn't his. After hearing the entire story a while later on, Boss Lu immediately got furious, slamming his hand on his desk. He was furious about how a wife could be so disgusting, having 3 kids that belongs to another man other than your husband. At this point, Han Feng started to see the similarity. Suddenly, Boss Lu had a change of mind. He told Han Feng that he would make sure to get him a sniper rifle. Han Feng, on the other hand, couldn't believe how such obvious fake stories convinced both of them. Hearing this, Han Feng thanked Boss Lu. Boss Lu told Xiangzi to see if he could get a semi-automatic rifle for Han Feng. He also gave Han Feng a loaded handgun as a gift. Seeing this act of kindness surprised Han Feng greatly. He was a little taken aback of how generous Boss Lu was. Still nervous, Han Feng made mention that a friend of his was working for the government, and he told him that due to the abnormal weather, there was going to be a shortage of food and other supplies, so it was better to stockpile when it was available in advance. Boss Lu was skeptical about it, but seeing the serious look on Han Feng's face made him consider it. He told Han Feng he got it. He then tells them to get lost. Just seeing Li Zi's face annoyed him greatly. Outside, Han Feng and Li Zi were walking. Li Zi started his bragging session, saying he handled the situation beautifully. If it wasn't for him, Han Feng would have been done for. Also, Boss Lu was in a good mood, so he could have even asked him for a cannon and he'd probably had said yes. Han Feng thanked Li Zi, and as a token of his gratitude, he promised to grab Li Zi some cigarettes on the way. Hearing this, Li Zi, being his usual self, told Han Feng not to be silly. He didn't want cigarettes, he just liked helping people, but if Han Feng really insisted, then he wanted Huazi, as other brands made him choke. Although the price of the cigar was high, once he got paid for his project, he would definitely pay Han Feng back and even take him to a sauna. Han Feng immediately tuned him out when he started his usual bragging session. Han Feng was lost in his own thoughts. Now supplies and weapons were all in check. He was all set for the early stages of the apocalypse, at least. All that's left was to study his ability. Han Feng knew that if he could fully master his ability, his chances of survival would skyrocket. But at that moment, Han Feng's foot slipped on the icy snow. Then, he did a mid-backward flip as his shoe was sent flying. Han Feng fell on the floor, groaning in pain, holding his foot. He felt like his foot was broken. So, trembling in pain, Han Feng gave the keys of his SUV to Li Zi, asking him to take him to the hospital. Li Zi replied nervously that he didn't have a driving license and can't drive without one. So with great effort, Li Zi lifts Han Feng onto his shoulder. He looked like he had eaten a bowl of raw pepper and would pass out any moment. And Han Feng, well, he was speechless with his current situation. He told Li Zi to just get a taxi. Meanwhile, the snowstorm was getting heavier and worsening by the minute. It was seriously freezing outside. The entire hospital's outer walls were frozen. Inside, a nurse on night shift was observing the worsening weather with concern. Just then, the phone rang and the nurse stood up to pick up. And from the looks of it, her figure was in direct competition with Li Hiona's. She was immediately called to the hall as there was an emergency. On the other hand, Han Feng had gotten an X-ray scan, and it was as he feared. His leg was indeed broken. Upon close examination, the physician diagnosed that, according to his scan, there was a stable fracture on Han Feng's right tibia. The physician then continued that he was going to set it so Han Feng shouldn't worry. However, Han Feng needed to stay for an hour for observation. And after that, he can grab his meds and leave. At the waiting hall, Han Feng, staring at the X-ray scan, couldn't wrap his head around the timing of his accident. He thought of all times that the accident could have occurred. It had to happen just before the apocalypse hit. Just then, Li Zi called him saying he had to go. He's got a few deals he had to close. But if Han Feng needs anything, he's a phone call away. Hearing this, Han Feng just gave him a thumbs up, telling him to take care. Sighing heavily, Han Feng then took a good look around and noticed that the hospital was quite busy tonight. The city hospital was overflowing with patients, victims of accidents caused by the sudden blizzard and plummeting temperatures. The emergency beds were lined up in the hallway, a grim testament to the worsening conditions outside. Looking from left to right and right to left, Han Feng wondered how long it would be till he gets his meds. But at that moment, a pair of bouncing melons immediately caught his attention. Unable to look away, Han Feng continued to stare at them like a creep. These extraordinary pair of beauties belonged to Nurse Jean, a head nurse of the hospital, who happens to be checking a patient who had several severe wounds. After checking that his vitals were stable, she told the attending nurse to administer another dose of glucose in 10 minutes. Also, if the patient's heart drops below 80, administer an epinephrine. On the other end of the hall, Han Feng was observing the head nurse with an evident blush. He thought she was amazing. To become a head nurse at such a young age was indeed an amazing feat, and not only that, Nurse Zhan was incredibly skilled, kind to every patient, and doesn't seem to have a chip on her shoulder. But the most important and obvious thing to notice about her was that she was drop-dead gorgeous. A pretty face and a well-defined good body. It seems she got everything going for her. However, she was also way too clueless about her charm and surroundings. Her behavior exposes herself often, and the disturbing part was that she wasn't self-conscious about it. Like at all. And Han Feng noticed that about her right away. But he seems not to be the only one. An old man sitting beside him called her over, claiming it was an emergency. Hearing this, Nurse Zhan was polite and rushed over. She apologized to the old man for any inconvenience. They were a bit short-staffed at the moment. Anyway, can I come a bit later to help you? She asked. But the old man replied that his back suddenly started hurting. And it's been getting worse lately. Unbeknownst to Nurse Zhan, the old man took out his phone and started recording her from underneath her uniform. He asked Nurse Zhan if she could take a look and find out what's causing it. But the clueless head nurse apologized again, saying they'll need to get an X-ray to be sure of the cause. Just like all perverts, the old geezer insisted the nurse took a look anyway. He reached out his hand and forcefully grabbed the waist of the head nurse. Nurse Zhan was ticklish and uncomfortable with the old man's behavior, so she told the old pervert to wait for the resident physician to examine him. Hearing this boldened the old geezer's actions, so he slowly lowered his hands down Nurse Zhan's ass, intending to give it a squeeze. But at that precise moment, something flew towards his way. Then, bam! Seconds later, the old pervert was seen on the floor, groaning in pain. Seeing this, Nurse Zhan asked the old geezer if he was okay, but Han Feng appeared at the scene, apologizing for hitting the old man with his crutches. He claimed it was his first time using them. Han Feng then bends down and took the old man's phone, claiming he was checking whether it was broken. This immediately alarmed the old man, who told Han Feng not to touch his phone. But it was too late. Han Feng was already checking the content displayed on the screen. His expression became dark as his entire presence was dim with an ominous aura. He didn't even notice that the bandages on his leg had loosened and fallen off. Everything was just as he suspected. This fucking old geezer got some nerve, filming up a nurse's skirt and even molesting her in public. Han Feng showed the old man the video and asked for a good reason why he shouldn't call security, and have them escort the old man to a police station where they love perverts like him. Han Feng told the old man to scram, and he shouldn't dream of getting his phone back. Also, the next time Han Feng sees his creepy face, everything he did was going straight to the internet. Hearing all this, the old man could do nothing but grit his teeth in frustration. Then, he quickly made a mad dash for the exit, running as fast as his old legs could carry him. Seeing this made Nurse Zhan shout for the old man to wait. She was confused about the old man's sudden display of energy. Didn't he say his back hurt? How can he ran off so quickly? Hearing this, Han Feng was utterly speechless, his mouth wide open highlighting what he was witnessing. He couldn't believe it. There couldn't be people this naive in the world, could it? Han Feng showed Nurse Zhan the evidence for the old man's sudden actions. Nurse Zhan was genuinely shocked. She wondered how she didn't notice anything. Han Feng gave Nurse Zhan the phone, telling her to decide whether she wants to wipe the evidence or call the cops, whichever makes her feel better. However, she should be more careful from this day forth so perverts like the old geezer don't take advantage of her. Hearing this, Nurse Zhan gave her usual radiant smile, thanking Han Feng. Also, she'd been meaning to ask Han Feng about the issue with his leg. Isn't your ankle injured? The way the question was asked sent a chill down Han Feng's spine. And as he remembered he had a broken leg, all the pain that was masked by his urge to protect Nurse Zhan came flooding in like a broken pipe. Seconds after, Han Feng's screams could be heard across the hall. Nurse Zhan had expertly rebandaged Han Feng's leg. And still with that radiant smile, she asked Han Feng if it still hurt. No, not at all. Han Feng thanked her. So with vigor, Nurse Zhan assured Han Feng that she'll never let such bad people get away with such behavior anymore. Hearing this, Han Feng just tells her to be more aware of her surroundings and she will be fine. And to put it to a check, he lifted his injured leg to have a feel of those divine melons. And to his horror, Nurse Zhan was not aware at all. Not even a little bit. I mean, didn't she just say she will be more attuned to her surroundings? But at that moment, another nurse called for her. Nurse Zhan was needed elsewhere, so as she got up to leave, she reminded Han Feng not to forget to come back in a week's time to get his ankle checked. A week's time, huh? I guess I won't be seeing her again. Han Feng thought of this as he got up, grabbed his crutches and left the hospital scene. The very next day, the snowstorm got even worse than before. It was becoming more and more difficult to even take a walk outside. Every channel was interrupted with an urgent news. It was announced that all regions in the country was experiencing the same icy weather, and other countries worldwide was no different. However, experts and specialists from 46 other countries have all gathered at UN to discuss the weather's anomaly. But one thing was certain, according to their experts, the snowstorm won't last long. So everyone should follow the guidelines issued by the government and refrain from hoarding supplies and spreading rumors. However, Han Feng, enjoying a glass of premium wine in his apartment while listening to the government's bullshit, thought it was typical for them to do so to keep their citizens from panicking. If Han Feng hadn't been reborn, he would have also believed in the pile of shit they were spouting. Anyway, he was prepared this time around. His supplies were fully stocked, and his house was reinforced to withstand almost any form of break-in and has its own heating system. He needn't worry about his survival for a long while. At that moment, a ding sound brought Han Feng from his reverie, and as he checked his chat group for the housing complex residents of his building, almost everyone was delighted with the current situation the world was facing. They were glad to be lazing around without going to school or work. However, one message got Han Feng's attention. Someone with the chat name of Mysterious Person had announced that the Ice Age apocalypse was about to begin. Han Feng, with a surprised look, questioned himself how the person knew about the apocalypse. It looks like Han Feng needs to be mindful of this mysterious person. Reading through the comments, the property management team was under constant pressure from the tenants to go shovel the snow outside. And although it was minus 20 degrees outside, the tenants didn't care and wanted to take their cars to the supermarket to get supplies. Inside a 3D version of the group chat, there was uproar. Everyone was arguing about procuring supplies since they didn't know when the weather will revert to normal. The tenants are protesting for the property managers to show themselves. They demanded an explanation as to why they haven't shoveled the snow outside the apartment complex. Seeing the angry mob, the management team apologized, saying there wasn't anything they could really do in this snowstorm. However, the tenants still didn't care. What's the point of paying them if they couldn't handle such a small matter? If the property managers couldn't help them, then they demanded a refund on the fees that they had been paying them until now. Among the crowd was Han Feng, who scoffs at the absurdity of the situation. He knows that this crisis was beyond the control of humans, so the current argument was completely meaningless. One of the residents steps up and tries to calm everyone down. He states that the snowstorm was so heavy that even if the property managers try to clear the snow by themselves, it will just be covered again in a few hours. He then suggests that they all work together to clear the snow. If they had done that instead of fighting, they would have been able to go out long ago. After all, the property managers were humans just like everyone present. There was really nothing they could do in this kind of disaster. He then questions if everyone was just taking their frustration out on them. Hearing this, some of the residents question why they were the ones being lectured. Why was the person speaking on behalf of the property management team? Was he the owner? They have been paying the property managers for such situations like this, so why should they waste their energy helping? However, Glasses Man replied that he wasn't speaking on behalf of the property management team. He was speaking objectively and realistically. Besides, driving a car to the supermarket was impossible. And even if they do manage to clear the roads in their neighborhood, who could guarantee that the roads outside were also cleared? Hearing this, the angry tenants asked Glasses Man what they should do then. Upon hearing this, Glasses Man was delighted. So he proceeds to suggest that they walk to the supermarket. If everyone present agrees, he will personally go outside with the property management team to clear a footpath for everyone. It was in that moment that Han Feng seemed to have some recollection of Glasses Man. His name was Zhang, and if Han Feng remembers correctly, in his previous life, Zhang was a very lively person, and that's it. That's all he remembers. Seriously. But at that moment, another user cuts in, saying the matter at hand wasn't complicated, so why was everyone making it such a drag? Those who want to go outside should just clear the roads, and the ones who aren't should just shut their bitch ass up. Fighting for half a day just to clear some snow was very annoying. His disinterested attitude on the matter was evident to see, so he immediately logged out as quickly as he logged in, leaving everyone speechless. As brief silence ensues, another user commented that he will also head outside to help. He wants the roads cleared quickly because he needed to help his good brother down the streets to discuss business worth millions. Han Feng immediately knew who the person was. After all, there was only one person who spoke in such a manner. Li Zi. Following Li Zi's volunteering service was a few others who also agreed to go shovel snow outside. Just as the discussion was nearing its end, Another user stole the spotlight. Raising her hand as well, she also wanted to shovel snow outside, but added she might be physically weak compared to everyone. Also, she had had a flu for the past 2 days, but Brother Zhang had set an example, so she was willing to help however she can. Han Feng, knowing firsthand the cunningness of the user, wondered if she really intended on going in the first place. Hearing that Hyona was willing to go do shoveling, all of her simps hopped in as well, saying that they are willing to cooperate. They were so many abled men, so how can they let their goddess shovel snow? She should just stay home, rest well, and recuperate. Hyona thanked everyone for their concern. Since they were insisting, she will have to trouble everyone and do what she had been told. Han Feng logged off, irritated by the bitch's acting. He can't help but admit that Hyona is really good at catching people's heart. Even he was a victim of her act once upon a time. And speaking of the devil, Li Hyona messaged Han Feng at that moment, asking what he has been up to lately. She also made mention that Han Feng promised her that he would contact her, so she's been waiting. Hyona then asks Han Feng a favor to go get her some supplies, then proceeds to send him a seductive selfie, wearing too little, despite the cold. Han Feng noticed this. After all, it was Hyona's usual tactics to get her bootlickers to do her bidding. Han Feng contemplated on how to reply her, and from the looks of it, Han Feng's reply made Hyona's poor phone face her wrath. She was really pissed with Han Feng's sudden path of a bootlicker counterattacks. On the 3rd day since it started snowing, the temperature was -20 degrees. In the early stages of the apocalypse, everyone still had the central heating system running, and the internet was still up and running, so everyone was living their lives as usual. Meanwhile, Han Feng was bored. Just on the 2nd day, and he was already bored to death. He had been scrolling through numerous videos for 3 days. It seems Han Feng's biggest problem during this apocalypse was to learn how to endure loneliness. And his broken leg wasn't helping either. It needed at least a month to make a full recovery. Not having better things to do, he decided to continue scrolling through random videos where he came across some news about the power of self-recovery. In the video, the doctors sewed up the wounds of a patient who jumped off from the 15th floor of a building. After sewing, they discovered that the patient's damaged internal organs and bones had started to regenerate. This miraculous news gave Han Feng an idea. He remembered that he had an ability that promotes growth. "Why didn't I think of this earlier?" he said. Han Feng activated his green light, reached out and placed his hand on his broken leg, wondering if there will be some kind of effect. He poured everything he got into this little experiment. And as the green light dissipates, Han Feng waited for any signs of effect. But nothing, absolutely nothing occurred. Seeing this, he laid comfortably on his sofa feeling a bit disappointed. He thought that the green light would be able to help him recover his injury faster. Suddenly, drowsiness hits him hard, and after a single yawn, Han Feng was out cold. In his sea of consciousness, he dreams. He was wearing some tribal outfit while riding a mountain goat. And from what it seems, he was also traveling with these herd of goats. Among the herd, there were some that even flew. Han Feng continued to ride the wild goat like a madman, and even smacked its ass with a whip, then yelling and laughing as the goat sped up. Behind him was the herd as they also picked up the pace directly on the ground and in the air. So as the smacking continued, the goat Han Feng was riding was clearly displeased, and in the next moment, it tossed Han Feng off, sending him flying and crashing to the ground with a bam and a crackling sound. On the ground, he had hit his ankle and was now in severe pain. Han Feng felt like his ankle was broken, and as he groans and shakes uncontrollably in pain, unable to move, the goat slowly came to Han Feng's side upon seeing him in pain, and started licking his wounded ankle. Although Han Feng felt disgusted with the goat's actions, he patted the goat's head anyway as a form of a thank you. But this, however, once again, annoyed the goat. Its irritation clearly evident on its face as it stares at Han Feng with an annoyed look. It then extended its tongue several meters long and wrapped it around Han Feng's leg. And as it raised the injured leg in the air, spreading Han Feng's legs wide open in the process, Han Feng screamed in shock. Seconds later, the wrapped tongue of the goat started to glow green, and as its saliva dripped all around Han Feng's leg, he began to feel a familiar sensation. Then, a loud scream echoed the entire apartment as Han Feng woke up from his hideous dream. Breathing heavily, Han Feng was also covered in sweat like he'd ran a marathon. He thought to himself, what was with this weird-ass messy dream? And why the hell was I hanging around with goats of all things? Also, what was it planning to do to me? At that moment, Han Feng's eyes widened as he felt the familiar sensation again. The same sensation he experienced at the end of his dream. And as his attention shifted toward his broken ankle, he saw that his leg was covered in the green flame. Still in shock, Han Feng slowly, little by little, removed his bandages. And when he was done, he couldn't believe what he was seeing and feeling. His leg didn't hurt anymore, not even a little bit. It had completely healed in just a few hours. So, with this groundbreaking discovery, Han Feng, beaming with curiosity, pondered if the green light actually helped with his self-recovery while he was asleep. Deciding to test it out some more, Han Feng grabbed a kitchen knife, and as he stares nervously at his finger, he began to tremble uncontrollably in fear. But he also knew that, in order to survive in this apocalypse, he needed to find out more about his ability ASAP. So taking a deep breath, Han Feng brought the kitchen knife close to his finger. Then, closing his eyes in a half-assed manner, he made a small cut on his finger. Blood immediately started to ooze out in an uncontrolled manner. However, in the next moment, the green light summoned by Han Feng engulfed his entire hand. Then, soon after, a smirk crept on Han Feng's lips. And from this scene, it seems Han Feng's initial speculations were correct. And although he hadn't fully understood his ability, this was a correct step in the right direction. Meanwhile, outside the apartment complex, some of the residents were shoveling the snow, while others also tried removing a massive broken tree that used to be in front of the apartment building. Here, the face of Glasses Man, Zhang, was finally revealed. Similar to his 3D animated version, Zhang Shueo had his usual bright smile, and he seems to be a young man, right about Han Feng's age as well. Zhang, who had calmed the situation earlier in the 3D animated chat room, thanked everyone for their hard work. He also apologized in a polite manner to an old man named Lu Guangyao, but everyone knows him as Uncle Lu. Glasses Man told Uncle Lu that despite his old age, he came out to work in this heavy snow. Hearing this, Uncle Lu just casually laughed it off, saying he didn't do much. He pointed at the two young men beside him, the Zhan brothers, and continued that they did pretty much all the work. The Zhan brothers, Zhan Qinwen and Zhan Qinwu, who were shivering in the cold, smiled in a confident and shy manner respectively. They also laughed off the praise, saying it was their duty to help the elderly in these hard times. At this point, it seems pretty obvious that they were twins. Just then, a loud bam sounded, startling the two. So as they turned to the side, they noticed that someone in a pink dress had slipped and fallen. The Zhan brothers came to her aid. The confident brother of the two, Zhan Qinwen, extended his hand, asking if the girl in question was all right. He proceeded to advise her to be careful since the ground was all frozen and very slippery. The girl took his hand, and as we got a closer look, it was none other than head nurse Zhan of the city's hospital. She was wearing a hot pink coat with a matching earmuffs. So, with a polite tone and a warm smile, she thanked the Zhan brothers for their help and advice. Zhan Qinwen replied that they were going to clear the main path first, so if Nurse Zhan needed any help, she could call them and they would come running. Nurse Zhan, known by everyone by the name Zhan Jian, thanked them again, replying that she could handle the rest by herself. On the other hand, Glasses Man was still chatting with Uncle Lu. He said the snow was gradually getting heavier, so they would have to be quick when purchasing supplies later. Hearing this, Uncle Lu agreed. Uncle Lu, while smoking his cigarette with a serious expression, whispered that their discussion had reminded him of something. Seeing his serious look, Zhang asked what it might be, and Uncle Lu, whose expression now was that of a nervous person, just casually said it was nothing significant. He proceeded to say that he had heard for the past few days, an owner in their neighborhood had been bringing supplies on a small truck like he was moving houses, and that was a little suspicious to him. Glasses Man laughingly questioned Uncle Lu. Isn't that a common sight? Perhaps that person was just moving into their apartment complex or renovating his apartment. Hearing this, Uncle Lu said nothing for a brief moment. Then, while holding his cap, his face again became serious. He whispered that he saw gas tanks and a fireplace furnace being imported in the building. And according to him, it didn't seem normal for someone who was moving in, especially during that period, when the weather then was a stark contrast to the weather now, right? After taking a long drag, the old man said it was as if the person was preparing for winter, as if the person knew what was coming. At that precise moment, their intense discussion was interrupted by the Zhan brothers, who told Zhang and Uncle Lu that they had cleared the main path, and perhaps they should start moving out now. Uncle Lu thanked them for their hard work. However, at that moment, a creepy, scary-looking guy grabbed the brothers' shoulders, startling them. He made mention that everyone had gathered around and were talking about making preparations to get through the winter. It sounded interesting and he wanted in on it too. But before he could continue, a thick snowball hit him, hard, in the back of the head. The snowball was thrown by a woman named Lu Yen. She shouted at the guy, Wu Kuanyan, to stop slacking and come over to continue working. Hearing this annoyed Wu Kuanyan, who started to yell, complaining that he did all the work alone, while Lu Yen just watched from the sidelines and gave commands like she was a supervisor. Lu Yen raised her hand towards Wu Kuanyan's pointed finger and told him not to point his finger at someone while talking. It signified that someone had bad manners. And it seems the two were a couple and their arguments were a regular occurrence. Seeing this, the Zhan brothers silently slipped away from the chaos. Glasses Man, with his usual demeanor, told them to stop quarreling. The main path was cleared and they needed to hurry up to get supplies. Hearing this, head nurse Zhan shouted for everyone to get ready to head out to the supermarket to buy some supplies. The twin brothers also wanted to buy supplies for themselves and for their parents also. But Uncle Lu, with a casual smile, once again, asked Glasses Man what his thoughts were on the matter. Does he think that person knew about this ice storm and stocked up in advance? Glasses Man said nothing and continued to stare at his phone with a serious expression. And after what seems like forever, he laughingly replied that he wasn't overly concerned about it. It was a brief snowstorm after all, and would pass in a few days. When it does, everyone's lives and everything would soon return to normal. As of now, he believes what Uncle Lu said wasn't related to the current weather. Maintaining his bright smile, Zhang pushed up his glasses and continued that, even if they were to assume the snowstorm doesn't stop and would only worsen over time, and if someone in their neighborhood possessed a huge amount of resources, wasn't that a good thing? Uncle Lu, scratching the back of his head, started to laugh when he heard this. I suppose you're right. It's true that the young ones indeed use their brains more, he replied. After a while, the snowstorm seemed to have gotten a little bit worse. So everyone, including Glasses Man, had their umbrellas up. Glasses Man then told everyone to queue up and ready themselves to move out. They shouldn't push anyone. The snowstorm was getting heavier and heavier, and they needed to try to hurry back in 3 hours when they've gotten the supplies. Soon, they all marched together toward the supermarket under the heavy snow. Meanwhile, an apartment from the lot had its lights on, and it seems that this apartment was not facing challenges as the rest were. Inside this apartment was Han Feng, who was passed out, drooling and covered in sweat. His situation was a direct opposite of what was happening outside his apartment. As Han Feng began to twist and turn on his sofa, someone started calling out to him, knocking on his door. Han Feng woke up, still half asleep, and as he wipes his drool, he opened the door. Han Feng apologized, saying he was asleep, hence why it took a while to open the door. At the door was none other than Li Zi. Li Zi had a smirking smile on his face, smoking a lit cigarette. He told Han Feng that he brought the item he wanted, a semi-automatic rifle. And just like that, Han Feng's drowsiness vanished immediately. Han Feng thanked Li Zi with a polite smile, but Li Zi replied that Han Feng shouldn't mention it. After all, Han Feng was the reason why Brother Lu was able to properly secure supplies in advance before the situation had gotten this bad. Hearing this, Han Feng just chuckled. Brother Li, you're too kind, he said. I only did that because Brother Lu was kind and generous. And this semi-automatic rifle is all thanks to him. Suddenly, Li Zi's demeanor shifted as he sighed deeply. Han Feng noticed this instantly and asked what was wrong, his voice laced with evident concern. Hearing the question, Li Zi asked Han Feng if he'd heard of the supermarket in the East District. Of course I have. Well, when we went there in the snowstorm today to buy some stuff, the supermarket was completely emptied by someone last night. What? Emptied out an entire supermarket in one night? Shock washed over Han Feng as he shouted in disbelief. However, inwardly, he already knew this was destined to happen, exactly like it did in his previous life or similar to it. In his previous life, he heard the exact same thing and had his speculations, but with Li Zi's confirmation, this news was serious and shouldn't be taken lightly. So, as they parted ways, Li Zi casually told Han Feng that he was heading back to his apartment. However, Han Feng shouldn't forget to wear more clothes to stay warm. Of course, Brother Li, thanks for the advice, Han Feng replied, still lost in thought. Back inside the apartment, Han Feng shuts the door, not forgetting to lock it as well. Still in thoughts, Han Feng wondered who could be capable of secretly emptying out an entire supermarket overnight. How did they do it? He continued to ponder, trying to piece together the mystery. But the only thing that comes to mind were the comics and novels that he used to read back in the day. The ones about superhumans who could store things into another dimension and had the power to manipulate space. Han Feng had a gut feeling that it was more than just a regular theft. Could there really be someone with spatial abilities? Han Feng wondered silently. Just thinking about the possibility that there might be more humans other than him with superpowers really unsettled the shit out of him. So as Han Feng clenched his fist, glowing with green aura, he admitted to himself with determination. He needed to do more research on his ability. If there were really people like him out there, He needed to have some countermeasures as insurance at the very least. Han Feng thought of this as he sat on his sofa, reading through a book, his serious expression never leaving his face. Han Feng was resolved. With his current understanding, he needed to run more tests. Han Feng understands that his ability affects all kinds of food supplies, which increase their quantity or size. He needed a plan, a strategy. The pages of his book were filled with notes, sketches, and observations on different food items. Han Feng reflected, looking at the drawings of soybeans, broccoli, wheat, and even a slab of meat. His ability was undoubtedly unique, but the success rate was very low and mastering it was proving to be a challenge. On average, the soybeans' success rate in attempts were about 1/10. And when it comes to meat, on the other hand, well, Han Feng hadn't had any success in that aspect since his first try. Han Feng reached for a soybean and readied himself to test his power once more. And as his hand began to glow with a green light, he couldn't help but wonder why his exact situation was happening. Han Feng waited nervously as the soybean in his hand started to react when the green light continued to swirl around it. Then, seconds later, a volatile reaction occurred, ending in a burst of green energy. Han Feng, once again, failed. He was left holding a lump of the black hole substance from earlier. And judging from his reaction, it was evident that he was annoyed and frustrated. Barely able to control his emotions, Han Feng's shoulders slumps as he sighs heavily, calming himself. He wasn't going to let the weight of his repeated failures get the better of him. After all, he knew the failure rate was too high anyway, but he wasn't ready to give up. Han Feng crushed the black hole substance in his hand, determined to figure out how to use his ability properly that very night. No matter what. A while later, his table clock showed that it was almost midnight. However, Han Feng was still in his relentless pursuit, unwilling to rest until he achieved some semblance of success. Finally, after countless attempts, he managed to grow a fully grown, fresh soybean plant. Han Feng was shirtless, sweating profusely, clearly tired. He felt like he was dying. But all his efforts weren't for naught. He had finally gotten a little knack for using the green light, but at the cost of having a significant amount of his energy drained. Breathing heavily, Han Feng sat on his sofa, and in front of him was a pile of the black hole substance and 7 fully grown soybean plants, signifying his failure and success rate. With this, he'd made analysis on what he'd learned so far. Han Feng deduced that when using his green light, the energy wasn't constant. And every type of food has their own corresponding energy values. And it will result in a failure if its corresponding energy value is wrong. This illustration reminded Han Feng on something he'd seen with a similar model. An online virtual dancing game that was popular a decade ago. Han Feng started connecting the dots on how to apply this game logic to his energy control. He visualized energy arrows in the rhythm game style, each second needing the right amount of energy input. If the energy values were like the energy directional input arrows, then the energy inputs have to be correct for every second. And all Han Feng needed to do was pinpoint the critical points. Han Feng's hand glowed green as he focuses intensely to hit the perfect critical point. Shortly after, Han Feng channeled glowing green energy and nailed it perfectly. Perfect, Han Feng exclaims in excitement. In his hand was a healthy-looking plant. With his successful triumph, Han Feng moved on to the next experiment. Meat. Standing in the kitchen, a bowl full of some meat and another of soybeans was in front of him. Han Feng recalls his previous failures when it came to meat. Meats, they were different and significantly harder than vegetables. They also turn into a black liquid if they fail, and were extremely disgusting. However, he thought the principal theory shouldn't be that difficult. So as Han Feng stood there, shirtless, staring at a meat in one hand and a couple of soybeans in the other, he willed himself. First, he tried to grasp the energy value that meat requires. Han Feng then activate both the red and green light together with the meat and soybeans, thinking that the time needed would obviously be longer compared to vegetables. Han Feng picked his spot and decided to go all in, but immediately as he did, his face was completely covered with the black, disgusting liquid. That's right, the reaction had exploded in his face. So he tried again with a shorter time. Same results. Then, another one with an even shorter time than the one before. And again, he missed. He then chose his longest time yet. And you guessed it, another miss. Han Feng kept missing again and again and again. At this point, he was completely covered in the black liquid, fuming and shouting why it was so freaking difficult. On the other hand, his kitchen, which had become nasty with the black liquid everywhere, looked like a disaster zone. As silence ensues when Han Feng had calmed himself down, he took a moment to meditate amidst the chaos. He tried to center himself and his energy. And once again, Han Feng summoned the red and green light as he focused on channeling it into the meat and the soybean. The arrows flew around and the countdown started. Showing his intense concentration, Han Feng felt it. At that precise moment, he was sure it was the right time, so he went all in. The results was a success. Finally, Han Feng had done it. He had successfully managed to achieve his desired result with meat as well. All sweaty and out of breath, Han Feng wore a smug smile, extremely proud of himself. However, all his attempts had gotten the best of Han Feng as he collapsed on the kitchen floor with his big, fat, juicy meat lying beside him. He was drained and seconds away from passing out. His last thoughts were of how he'd finally found the synthesis method for meat. And with that thought, Han Feng lost consciousness. The scene shifts to the outside world, where a major snowstorm has hit and was being broadcasted on television, updating everyone. They were just 3 days in, and the current weather was the worst snowstorm that only occurs once in a century. Everyone was advised to remain in their homes and avoid going outside. Also, to ensure standard basic living for everyone, defenses and measures had been taken for all locations in the country. This woke Han Feng up, who lazily laid on his sofa, tired. He leisurely listened to the news with pretty much no concern. The news continued that the disaster was widespread, and efforts were being made to combat it. All means of transportation, electricity, and network services were starting to break down. But everyone should be patient and stay home. At this moment, Han Feng sat up and stretched out his tired muscles, gearing up for another day indoor. He knew that everything would start collapsing on this moment forth, just as it did in his previous life. And the government would also continue to spread their horseshit over and over till all broadcasting ceased. Besides, with the chaos outside, staying home was the best option. Just then, Han Feng's phone dinged. It was the neighborhood group chat. Already bored, he decided to check it out. In the 3D animated chat group, people were quarreling intensively. It was a complete shit show. Some neighbors were thinking of waiting for the government to save them, while others were skeptical and thinking about how to save themselves and hoarding supplies. But at that moment, Uncle Lu chimed in, asking everyone if they truly believe what the news said. Do you guys really think the news broadcasted by the government were true? Because if anyone believes that, then they got shit for brains. If the situation was under control like the news said, and the government really wanted to save them, then trucks full of supplies and a support team should have arrived long ago. But as of now, not even a single one had been seen to aid them. On the contrary, from what Uncle Lu had heard from his friends, armored vehicles, heavy weapons and tanks are heading towards their country's capital, City A. Based on this, there was only one possibility left. War. War was about to commence. Hearing this, everyone began to lose their shit. They crowded Uncle Lu, asking what they should do then. If what Uncle Lu said was true, then aren't they done for? Han Feng read the message with a skeptical look. What? A war is commencing? I think I had also heard about this before in my previous life, Han Feng thought. Back to the chat group. Glasses Man spoke up. If Uncle Lu's guess is really true, then we really have to start taking measures to save ourselves. There are already some owners in the neighborhood who have run out of food because they did not hoard enough. Moreover, we don't have a confirmed time of arrival of the support resources from the government. I think we should start organizing ourselves first and help those owners who are facing difficulties. Then, to add a dramatic effect, Glasses Man continued in a high-pitched voice, suggesting that the owners with ample food supplies should donate some of it to support the other owners who had run out. As a way to show his commitment, he was willing to start. Glasses Man was willing to donate half of his food supplies, and whoever needed it, at any time, should come looking for him. Hearing this, the crowd began to whisper among themselves. And from the looks of it, everyone was moved by Glasses Man's act of kindness and generosity. Wu Kuanyan deliberately singled out Li Hyona, asking if she intends on helping. Brother Jiang was right. Everyone in our neighborhood should help each other out to try to get through this crisis together. We can't just let those families starve in such a cold weather. Everyone, you can count me in on the donation as well. So what about you, Li Hyona? Will you be donating too? Upon reading the message, Hyona's face turned ugly. She was pissed, calling Wu Kuanyan a crazy bastard. There were so many people in the chat group, yet he had to ask her, "Is it because I rejected you before?" Hyona took on a sorrowful look and apologized, saying she didn't have any spare food supplies at home. Hearing this, one of her bootlickers immediately came to her defense, questioned why Wu Kuanyan had to ask Hyona. She didn't even have enough for herself like she said. Why don't you ask someone else? Wu Kuanyan replied that he didn't know, and he was just hoping that everyone would unite and help out one another. But if they can't guarantee true unity among themselves, then he won't be donating. What Wu Kuanyan said wasn't a lie. After all, no one wanted to become a sucker. Hearing this, The crowd fell silent for a while as everyone contemplated on their next action. Seconds later, a tenant among the crowd shouted, telling everyone that he wished to donate. Hearing this made others join in, donating all sort of things they can offer. Medicine, clothes, food, warm water, and stuff like that. Glasses Man expressed his thanks in place of the poor owners. Then, he suggested they appoint someone to be in charge of keeping the supplies gathered due to their quantity. And just like that, the interim owners committee was formed, and at the head was Glasses Man. They were to be an interim emergency committee that was responsible for supporting and planning of the donated supplies. Han Feng couldn't help but laugh. He remembers this event happening as well in his previous life. And if Han Feng recalls correctly, the interim committee was just a scheme to take the resources of anyone naive and foolish enough to believe in them. The days rolled by, and just like that, they were 6 days into the icy apocalypse. It was July 19th, and the temperature outside had already dropped to -40 degrees. The central heating system was no longer in working condition due to the extreme weather. Everyone thought of ways to keep themselves warm and maintain their body temperature. It was the same as his previous life. And this was just the beginning because the situation will only continue to get worse. But all these did not affect Han Feng. His heating system had enough to last for years. Han Feng was playing a video game, and in front of him was various snacks and drinks. A glass of refreshing Coca-Cola and an enticing cake were even part. It was as if the world outside was just an illusion. Han Feng was engrossed in his game until his phone rang. Picking up the call, the caller told Han Feng he was the person in charge of Block 8 of the building. And Han Feng, being the owner of apartment 1801 and part of Block 8, should head down to the basement car park to shovel snow outside. When Han Feng arrives, he should also sign in as everyone on their block did. Han Feng listened while he leisurely enjoyed his drink. However, upon hearing that he had to shovel snow outside, he was instantly annoyed. You see, the snow outside at this moment was so heavy that it would be considered suicide to use the means of manpower to clear it. About 30 minutes later, Han Feng, with a dejected attitude, arrived at the first floor's main lobby. The only reason Han Feng decided to join the shoveling team of his block was because he didn't want to have a fallout with his neighbors. He decided that it was best to lower the possibility of his neighbors finding out about his secret hoarding. However, looking at the pile of snow outside which had already sealed up the first floor entrance, everyone was amazed at the level at which the snow had piled up to. Their effort yesterday in clearing the snow outside was for naught. Seeing this, they eventually decided to open the door first, just to have a feel of what they were going to deal with. A fatty with an orange scarf called out to Han Feng to offer a helping hand in opening the door. Although Han Feng hated every moment he spent there, he approached the door anyway. Then, on the count of 3, the 3, with a considerable amount of effort, forcefully opened the door. Immediately upon opening, the massive blizzard that swept the entire area gave everyone the chill. They would have immediately gotten a frostbite if they hadn't had heavy clothes on. Everyone had to even close their eyes because of the extreme wind rushing inside. Han Feng began to shiver profusely under the intense cold. They might even die or get serious frostbite if they go out there. With the intense weather outside, only an idiot would go out to shovel snow. At that moment, someone came in, and upon hearing the person's voice, Han Feng was startled and immediately recognized the voice without looking behind him. Of course, it was none other than Li Zi, who walked in, calling everyone a coward. What everyone needed was an imposing attitude to do what's needed to be done. Han Feng had an incredulous look when he saw Li Zi, who was dressed as if it was a normal winter outside. He then tells Li Zi not to act brave because the snow outside wasn't a joke. They should try waiting it out until the snowstorm stops. But Li Zi, being his usual self, scoffs at the idea. He took a long drag of his cigarette, then dived right into the snow with his self-proclaiming imposing attitude. Li Zi rushed into the pile of snow as everyone watches. Seconds later, the only thing visible was his shaped path created when he decided to flirt with death. Li Zi was less than 30 seconds inside the pile of snow when he cried repeatedly for help. 2 neighbors offered their assistance in dragging his freezing body out. Li Zi's face was blue as he coughed violently. They quickly shut the door tightly after. At this moment, Han Feng asked with concern if Li Zi was alright. But there was no reply as Li Zi shivered uncontrollably. Seeing this, Han Feng told everyone to call it a day. They had no way of knowing when the snowstorm will stop. So he suggested that they go back, look for the person in charge at the building's car park to sign their attendance. It was evident that the current degree of the snowstorm can no longer be solved with manpower. Back inside, the tenants had used the building's car park as a meeting ground for everyone. At this moment, Glasses Man tried to calm and assure the worried tenants about the need to be patient. The snow had indeed become too heavy to clear at the moment, so their only option was to wait for the snow to lighten up. Then, they will proceed as before. Also, the basement car park would be used as a station point to collect their donations. On the other hand, Han Feng, witnessing the commotion, had an annoyed look on his face. He was waiting in line to sign the attendance sheet, and upon seeing Glasses Man, he wondered if he was the person named Zhang, the one that spearheaded the interim owners committee to scam its donors. At the same time, Zhang once again thanked everyone for their donation. Zhang continued that he honestly didn't expect so many owners to donate their resources. Their generosity would help anyone in need or facing any difficulty in these hard times. Again, Glasses Man thanked the donors in place of their helpless neighbors. Hearing this, everyone was all smiles, thinking it would be a smooth sailing from this point forth. They began to compliment each other as some commented that it was the right thing to do. They need to help each other in this difficult times. As long as they're united, they would be able to get through this crisis. Hearing this, Han Feng sighed in a mocking demeanor. He silently thought, warning everyone to just wait. The snow was not going to end, and very soon they were going to regret their actions. After they were done with the sign-in, Li Zi, who was still shivering, told Han Feng he was heading upstairs first. Hearing this, Han Feng replied that he understood, but at that moment, a familiar figure caught his attention. In front of him was no other than head nurse Zhan, who was preoccupied with maneuvering through the crowd with her stuff. She was carrying a few boxes when she was pushed by someone unintentionally. But luckily for her, Han Feng caught her before she fell. Nurse Zhan opened her eyes and was surprised to see Han Feng. She recognized Han Feng immediately upon seeing him, and her immediate question after was directly about Han Feng's leg. Nurse Zhan questioned if Han Feng's leg was already healed. Hearing the question, Han Feng let go of Nurse Zhan, pointing his hands everywhere as he quickly made up an excuse on the spot. Han Feng claimed he had an incredible recovery speed since he was young, so a broken ankle is nothing to him. He had recovered in just a few days. Hearing this, Zhan Jian, although she might be a head nurse, but due to her innocent and gullible nature, she believed Han Feng on the spot, her eyes beaming with excitement as she exclaims how awesome Han Feng's situation was. Han Feng offered to carry the boxes for Nurse Zhan, but she replied that it was fine. Han Feng still insisted as Nurse Zhan commented that the boxes were very heavy. "Don't worry, I'm strong and capable. You can take this as a form of a thank you for helping me with my bandages at the hospital," he said. Hearing this, Nurse Zhan agreed. Han Feng almost fell on his knees when she handed them over. The boxes were indeed very heavy, so Han Feng asked what was inside. Nurse Zhan replied that they were mainly medical supplies, and she was donating them to the committee. Seeing that Han Feng was struggling to walk, Nurse Zhan, with her warm smile, asked to carry them, because it looks like it was too heavy for Han Feng. But Han Feng said that he didn't feel like he's carrying anything at all, so it was fine. Hearing this, Nurse Zhan replied that she might look small, but she is actually stronger than most guys. So Han Feng shouldn't push himself too hard just to help her. Curious, Han Feng asked if she had always been strong from a younger age. Not really. There's really a reason behind it. Nurse Zhan said this with a sad demeanor, recalling something. But upon seeing Han Feng's curious stare, she decided against saying anything. She apologized, saying that it was nothing serious worth mentioning. It was just something she actually couldn't explain anyway. At that moment, Nurse Zhan recalls never asking Han Feng's name. "Han Feng. My name is Han Feng." Hearing this, Nurse Zhan also introduced herself, mentioning that her name was Zhan Shui. "It's a pleasure to meet you," she said. Seeing Zhan Shui's radiant smile, Han Feng began to blush like a cherry tomato. Zhan Shui asked what Han Feng does for a living. "Oh, about that. I'm unemployed." Hearing this, Zhan Shui was a little taken aback. Seeing this, Han Feng asked what was so surprising about an unemployed person. Before Zhan Shui could explain herself, someone bumped into her from behind, causing her to crash into Han Feng. Her bouncing melons were the first to make contact, and immediately as Han Feng felt those heavenly twin beauties, their degree of softness made Han Feng's eyes bulged out as he stares at them with an undivided attention. Zhan Shui quickly retreated, apologizing as usual. Han Feng replied that it was fine. After all, it wasn't her doing. Unbeknownst to the two, Hyona was passing by, and she immediately spotted Han Feng. Seeing a possible threat, Hyona called out to Han Feng, asking why she wasn't informed that Han Feng was at the car park. Hyona then quickly rushed and grabbed Han Feng's arm to control the situation. Also, she deliberately hugged Han Feng's arms tightly to her 38D melons, not knowing she had been beaten in that department from that point forth. Hyona asked Han Feng if Jin Shui was his friend. At that moment, before Han Feng could even get a word out, Jin Shui had already retrieved her boxes from Han Feng and was leaving with an embarrassing look, as if she was caught doing something she shouldn't. She told the two to continue chatting while she headed to the committee station. There was no need to disturb Han Feng any further. Jin Shui thanked Han Feng and proceeded to say that she could carry the boxes by herself for the rest of the way. So with those rushed words, Han Feng could only reply with an okay. Jin Shui rushed out of there like it was a fire drill. Staring at Jin Shui's hurried pace, Han Feng questioned Hyona why she came over to interrupt them. Hearing this, Hyona feigned a bright smile and replied that she just wanted to say hello. She only came to the car park to receive supplies. But when she saw Han Feng, she wanted to ask him why he didn't contact her like he said he would. I became very worried that something might have happened to you. Han Feng awkwardly scratched the back of his neck and smiled nervously, saying he was just about to send Hyona a message. Hearing this, Hyona straight out called Han Feng out on his lie. She continued that she just saw Han Feng chatting happily with Jin Shui just now. Then, with a pleading gesture and a warm smile, Hyona asked Han Feng if he had any spare food supplies in his apartment. If he has, can he share some with her because she had almost run out of food? Han Feng suddenly smirks when he heard this. He told Hyona that he didn't have much food left, but he was willing to share some with her. However, Hyona still hadn't replied to the message he sent a few days ago. So how about it? You want to come to my place and accompany me for a few days? Han Feng asked this with a smug look. Upon hearing this, Hyona was speechless. She was shocked by Han Feng's newly found boldness. Hyona got over her initial shock and told Han Feng that she didn't understand what he meant at that time. But if Han Feng wanted to have a chat with her, he could do so online. Hearing this, Han Feng spared no time with her anymore and began to leave, saying Hyona looks like she wasn't on board with the idea. So he was heading back to his apartment. Hyona's face turned ugly when she heard this, but seeing that Han Feng wasn't kidding around, she immediately grabbed Han Feng's jacket and asked him to wait. She proceeds to say that recently, she feels like Han Feng had changed. Is Han Feng doubting her feelings about him? He should know that she had always been very serious about her feelings towards him. It's just that she doesn't want anyone to think she is only with him because he is rich now. So can Han Feng give her a little more time? Hyona asked this with her usual cute, pitiful, sad face that always works on her bootlickers. Knowing exactly what Hyona was trying to do, Han Feng contemplated on what to do. If he hadn't already died once, he would have believed her. Han Feng really wanted to tear off Hyona's ugly mask off right now and be done with her. Just rip the bandage off, but that would be too easy and unsatisfying. Also, if he didn't find the identity of the man behind Hyona, then... Wait, why do I have to look for him? Han Feng at that moment suddenly had an idea. A brilliant one. He just needed to do exactly what he did in his previous life, and Hyona will bring over his boyfriend again. All Han Feng needs to do was wait patiently and prepare for it. So with these thoughts, Han Feng changed his strategy. He told Hyona that he was just teasing her. This revelation startled her for a brief moment. So Han Feng grabbed her by the arms and told her that he was just joking around, waiting for her reply. But now that he knows it, he will deliver some food supplies to her by tomorrow. Hearing this, Hyona praised Han Feng, saying that he was the best. Hyona quickly made the move to leave first, satisfied that what she wanted was accomplished. She waved goodbye, telling Han Feng that she was heading back first. If Han Feng wants to talk to her about anything else, he could do it online. Hearing this, Han Feng just told her to take care as he also waved her a goodbye. As Hyona turned to leave, she couldn't help but smile mischievously from ear to ear, pleased with herself. On the other hand, Han Feng also did the same as he watched Hyona's retreating figure. So 2 days slowly dragged by at a snail's pace, and the snowstorm outside hadn't shown any signs of stopping. If anything, it was getting worse by the day. But this didn't matter to Han Feng. He didn't give a shit. Back in his apartment, Hyona had been blowing up his phone non-stop, asking what Han Feng had been doing. Is he going to deliver the supplies like he said he would? Why was he not replying her? The messages just kept coming in. However, Han Feng didn't pay any mind to it. In front of him was a deliciously homemade dish. As he took a bite, Han Feng was in cloud nine, savoring the taste. Blissful and absolutely delicious. That's what he thought. And the weather was too perfect for such a nice and warm meal. While eating his warm meal, Han Feng explained that the numerous experiments over the past few days had allowed him to confirm two things. The first was that the meat could not be grown indefinitely. It had a natural limit to which it could be expanded. And regardless of the attempts, he was unable to make a full piece of meat grow any bigger than what it already was. However, during his experiments, he found out something interesting. a way around it, a loophole to grow the meat infinitely, and it was only possible if certain criteria were met. Holding a piece of meat with chopsticks, Han Feng explained that he would use half of the harvested soybeans to grow new seedlings, while he consumed the other half. So with this method, he always had a continuous supply of soybeans. Now, he found a way to apply a sort of similar process to the meat. When Han Feng cuts the meat into 2 pieces, then tries to grow them, each piece could grow back to its original form, a full-size meat. So under the 2 kinds of light, half a piece of steak with a few soybeans can produce a full piece of steak. With this realization, Han Feng conducted numerous tests after the success, compounding the effect. So using this formula, he will have an infinite supply of soybeans and meat. Feeling proud of himself, Han Feng was in cloud 9. He needn't need to worry about running out of supplies and having nothing to eat in the future. Meanwhile, on his television, a news reporter was still downplaying the severity of the situation. It was August 2nd, the 19th day of the snowstorm, and I'm currently on the Bodu Hithi Island in Maldives, which was 78 kilometers from the equator, and the average temperature here has already dropped to minus 42 degrees, the reporter said. The entire island was almost completely buried under ice and snow, and even the ocean was freezing up at such a fast speed that could be observed with the naked eye. However, according to experts' readings, the thickness of the ice layer has already reached 55 centimeters in depth. And from this current analysis, it was confirmed that the disastrous situation near the equator was pretty much the same in every country. Han Feng was still in his usual clothes inside his warm and comforting apartment, holding and enjoying a glass of red wine. He laughed internally, knowing full well that the reality of the situation was far worse than what the media was reporting. Suddenly, a shockwave startled him, felt like a huge earthquake. The glass of wine shook in his hand, spilling the content. Han Feng immediately went to his window, pushed back the curtain to take a look outside. Staring at an explosion outside, the city was in chaos. It was the 7th explosion in the past few days. Han Feng was curious as to what was happening out there. With his apartment fortified like a turtle shell, he was not worried about his safety. Just then, a loud vibrating noise startled him. As Han Feng gazed up at the sky through his window, he saw several military helicopters in the air. Han Feng was surprised and also a bit fascinated. It was his first time seeing a military helicopter, let alone this many at once. "Damn, so many helicopters," he exclaimed. He pulled back his curtain and checked the homeowners chat group on his phone. Han Feng knew that the situation outside would undoubtedly cause a huge commotion among the residents. And indeed, in the underground parking lot, it was as Han Feng thought. The homeowners were desperately trading for necessary goods and food supplies, and this led to many of them taking this opportunity to take advantage of others, which had also inevitably led to several conflicts. Even the ones who had donated their supplies earlier were facing the same problem. At this moment, Glass's man and a couple others from the interim owners committee appeared. He told everyone present that any resident facing difficulties should go down to their station in the underground parking lot to receive necessary resources for free. At this time, Han Feng had also made his way back to the basement underground parking lot. And due to his comfortable life in his apartment, he was still not used to the weather outside. So even though he was wearing heavy clothes, Han Feng continued to shiver in the cold, and also sneeze heavily from time to time. It was way too cold for him. Han Feng thought that if it weren't for information gathering, then he wouldn't have come back to the basement car park. As he walked further, he saw several homeowners, waiting impatiently in a queue for supplies. Han Feng was surprised to see that the interim owners committee was distributing food supplies to the residents. After all, in his previous life this didn't happen, and there was a rebellion in the neighborhood. And if Han Feng's memory serves him right, then it was indeed due to the committee. But this time around, they were giving away resources instead of scamming people. This means some aspect of the future has changed, and Han Feng wondered what was going on. Since information like this was primarily why he came down there, he decided to find out the real situation first. The panel showed a view of the chaotic distribution area from above, with people gathered around piles of supplies. And as Han Feng walked through the crowded area in the underground parking lot, he noticed that the number of residents facing difficulties was quite high, which meant that the committee got a lot of donations than what they got in his previous life. Staring at the distribution point from afar, a person in the line furiously shouted that he handed over several boxes of supplies at the beginning. But now he only got this much food. Glass's man, with a polite tone, explained that everyone got the same share as he was given. The fat man in glasses was not having it when he heard this. Frustrated, he held out the little supplies in his hand and exclaimed for Glass's man to give him back the resources he donated. Jiang still maintained his polite demeanor and smiled, apologizing that the resources could not be returned. The disaster was ongoing, and he hopes Fatty in Glasses can think of the bigger picture. Also, once the disaster was over, Zhang promised to pay Fatty in Glasses several times in cash. This frustrated Fatty in Glasses even more, who replied that no one knows how long the snowstorm will last. He just want his supplies back. But at this point, the crowd reacted to the actions of Fatty Man in Glasses, telling him to stop causing a ruckus. Their big brother Zhang already said he would compensate him when everything returns to normal, so why was he still bitching? He should stop being shameless for crying out loud. They even believe Fatty in Glasses never actually donated and just wants to get more resources. The crowd grew more agitated, and someone even yelled for Fatty in Glasses to take his share and leave, since everyone in the queue was waiting for their turn. Another voice told him not to embarrass himself, because supplies given out wouldn't be returned. The committee was already having a hard time, so why was he being such a pain in the behind? He should get lost. Han Feng observed the scene with a slight smirk. He knew there was no way the committee would let anyone take the supplies back, given the current situation. After all, those who put themselves on a moral high ground and criticize those who donated more, they really have no shame. Just then, someone spoke up beside Han Feng, unknowingly agreeing with his thoughts. The crowd was really shameless, he said, surprising Han Feng. This person was none other than Li Zi. Li Zi, with a tired expression, raised his hand and greeted Han Feng. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Han Feng responded with a smile, remarking how it had been a long time since they had last seen each other. How has he been? Not too bad. Not too bad at all, Li Zi said with a forced smile. He made mention that he was still surviving. But as he began to shake profusely, Li Zi blames his trembling figure from being flustered and powerless. Han Feng then asked him if his current situation was what he referred to as not bad. Li Zi explained that he had been surviving on water and minimal food for the past few days, so it's been a bit difficult if he was being honest. At that moment, his stomach grumbled loudly. Han Feng asked in shock if Li Zi really had no food left at this point. Yes, Li Zi replied. He told Han Feng that he thought of helping the poor neighbors previously, so he donated most of his supplies to the committee. But in the end, his food supplies at home ran out before the snowstorm ended, and the resources the committee was given out were very little. Li Zi continued that if he had known, he would have kept more resources for himself. Now, even if he made a scene to ask for his supplies back, everyone present would start making a fuss about it. Han Feng listened to Li Zi curiously. Then, with a sly grin, he called out to him. Han Feng put his right arm around Li Zi and asked if Li Zi could help him with something. Li Zi, with a curious look, nodded, wondering what it was. What favor was his brother asking? Han Feng then explained that if his brother Li does what he's about to ask of him, in return, he would give him 4 packs of instant noodles. This shocked Li Zi greatly, especially after listening to Han Feng's request. He questioned if Han Feng was really telling the truth. Han Feng nodded. Of course, he said. Don't think too much about it. I don't have much left in stock, but I can give you that much. Li Zi started crying, thanking Han Feng. He promised to never forget Han Feng's kindness. After all, he'd already figured out that his dear brother was just looking for an excuse to give him food. Han Feng reassured him, replying that Li Zi didn't need to be so polite. They were brothers and there was no courtesy needed. Li Zi grabbed Han Feng's shoulder, reassuring him not to worry. Still crying with joy, he promised that the small request was on him. Han Feng thanked him, mentioning that Li Zi could visit his house later to collect the food. Li Zi happily agreed, then said his farewell. He was going to collect his share of the resources being distributed first. So with that, he left. Han Feng, on the other hand, thought to himself that with a few packs of instant noodles and sausages, he would no longer need to personally come to the underground parking lot to gather information. And although he felt a bit guilty about taking advantage of Li Zi, it wasn't as important as being comfortable and lazy at home, eating good food, and playing video games. However, at that precise moment, someone loudly called out his name, catching his attention. And as he turned back, a flying slap came toward him. A woman in a red coat appeared and bitch slapped the living daylight out of Han Feng. Hard. And this woman was none other than Li Hyona. Han Feng was taken aback, wondering what had happened. Hyona expressed her disappointment in him, loudly saying Han Feng had royally disappointed her. The scene was loud enough to garner the attention of everyone present. Hyona shouted, asking why his bootlicker had not been replying her messages. But Han Feng was still in a daze, shocked that Hyona just slapped him. Did she just slap me? With a murderous look in his eyes, Han Feng placed a hand on his red cheek as he stared at Hyona. This bitch actually dared to slap me? I haven't even settled her previous debts yet, and she has the audacity to slap me for no reason. Did she think I'm that easy to bully? A bootlicker? Han Feng remained silent and tried his best to remain calm as Hyona continued to shout at him. She questioned if Han Feng was deaf. Or was he mute? Did he not hear that his goddess was talking to him? After a brief moment, Han Feng sighed heavily, then apologized to Hyona. Han Feng thought of the bigger picture. He didn't need to ruin his plan before it even started. Han Feng replied that he had an unexpected situation, a complication that made him unable to deliver the supplies he promised. Hyona was shocked to learn that the supplies got stolen. Han Feng explained that he placed the supplies outside his door and went back inside his apartment to get his keys. But when he came back out, they were gone. Hyona then asked if Han Feng searched for it. Yes, he said. I did search for it, but unfortunately, I couldn't find any clues at all. Hyona proceeded to ask if Han Feng still had some supplies left. Han Feng replied that he didn't have much left. His current supplies would probably last him for a few days if he only eats one meal a day. Hyona only heard the portion she was interested in and got excited, exclaiming that it was great news. At this moment, her expression was that of a soul devourer. Her eyes were empty like the bottomless abyss, and not caring about anything or anyone other than herself. She told Han Feng that he could split his resources in half and share it with her. That way they can both get through the disaster together. He just needs to eat one meal every 2 days and he will be fine. Hearing this, Han Feng was speechless. He couldn't even begin to imagine how shameless Hyona was, to even be capable of saying such words. Then, as a sly grin formed on his lips, he remembered. Oh, that's right. In her eyes, I am just a tool for her to use when needed. Her worthless bootlicker, Han Feng thought. He agreed to Hyona's request, saying that he did promise her after all. They would split his resources equally. Hyona immediately started playing nice, thanking Han Feng. She also told Han Feng to deliver it to her apartment because she will be waiting outside her door. Han Feng agreed to this, adding that they should do it at night, and he would send her a message when he was done packing. Satisfied with this, Hyona turned to leave, reminding Han Feng that she'll be waiting on his message. Also, Han Feng should head back soon so he doesn't catch a flu. After all, he needed to be able to deliver the supplies. Sure, wait for me tonight, Han Feng replied with a wave of his hand. Meanwhile, outside, the snowstorm was still getting worse by the minute. And back inside, Hyona was blowing up Han Feng's phone, and same as before, Han Feng was neither replying her messages nor picking up her calls. At this moment, she was waiting impatiently by her door. Hyona wondered if Han Feng wouldn't show up again. So as she stares at the elevator which had stopped working, then up the flight of stairs, Hyona was contemplating if she should climb the flight of stairs to Han Feng's apartment. Few seconds later, Hyona decided to do just that while internally cursing at Han Feng. If it weren't for the supplies, I wouldn't be looking for this bootlicker, she thought. After a few steps, Hyona was trembling all over as she took a deep breath. She was tired, and after starving for a few days, she only had little strength left. Almost there, she said, encouraging herself as she continued forward, step by step. As she got closer to her destination, she noticed that the emergency lights up ahead were broken, plunging that entire section into darkness. She also heard sounds up ahead, and this made her question aloud if someone was there. So as Hyona continued to stare up the flight of stairs in the dark, unsure whether to return or continue, she heard the sound of something being dropped, and before she could see or figure out what it was, a loud bam rang out. The emergency lights turned on at that moment. And from the looks of it, it seems that the lights was not broken, just off momentarily. With the lights back on, Hyona's current condition wasn't particularly pleasing to see. Her entire figure was covered with flour. She shouted, calling Han Feng's name. Han Feng, who appeared immediately at the scene, apologized to Hyona. He explained that he fell asleep and was in a rush down the stairs when he saw her messages. Due to this, he ran into a railing and dropped the flour he was carrying. Hyona was furious, asking if Han Feng was a pig. How come he can't even do such a simple thing like carrying a bag of supplies properly? Feeling disgusted with her situation, Hyona tried removing the pieces of the black polythene in her hair. Han Feng, on the other hand, just stared at her with a smug look on his face, satisfied that what he planned was executed perfectly. Han Feng specially prepared that flour to use on her. He then offered the remaining supplies to Hyona, who readily took it. And as he opened it to check its content, she was displeased to find out that all the food inside were moldy, like trash that was not edible. Han Feng, scratching the back of his head nervously, said that he had to carefully eat to keep this leftovers in stock, but couldn't preserve them for a longer time. That's why they look like that. Hyona picked up a piece and asked if the supplies was even edible. It was so dirty. Hearing this, Han Feng asked her to give it back if she dislikes and didn't want it. But Hyona quickly pulled away with the bag of supplies in her hand, saying she never said anything about not wanting it. This action didn't surprise Han Feng, who just stared at her expressionlessly. Internally, he laughed. So this is the goddess that I was pursuing with all my might, he thought. Hyona then took out a half-eaten apple and commented that although the surface of the apple had turned black, the inside should be fine, and she should be able to eat it after she'd peeled it with a knife. Then, she requested for the rest of the flour too. Hyona was excited that there was still half of it left. Amused, Han Feng just watched her. After all, from his perspective, the supplies were garbage and he never even resulted in eating such garbage in his previous life. He was sure of Hyona upsetting her stomach for a few days if she does eat the garbage he gave her. Also, the current temperature was so low that showering in this weather was equivalent to flirting with death. So this meant that the flour would be on Hyona for a while. Han Feng thought of this as he turned to leave. On his way, he felt something odd. It was as if someone was watching him. No, actually, someone wasn't just watching him, but also following him. So he immediately changed his route and decided to enter a floor to apprehend the culprit. As soon as he passed through the door, he hid behind it and waited patiently. Then suddenly, the shadow of the pursuer appeared at the door. Seconds later, a pair of boots followed. Han Feng quickly took action and grabbed the person by the jacket, then yanked the person on the floor. Seeking death, he shouted, and with a raised fist, Han Feng immediately halted his actions, startled. It was a girl, a young girl at that. "Hey, are you following me? What are your intentions?" Han Feng questioned, but the girl just stared back at him without uttering a word or making a sound. Realizing that the girl had no intention of answering him, Han Feng thought a little scare would be enough to get her to talk. So he put on an act of an old creep and said in a deep voice, "Oh, you don't want to say it, right? If you don't tell me, I'll strip you naked." However, he was a little disappointed that this did nothing, as the girl continued to stare at him blankly. Han Feng soon gave up and got up, realizing that the young girl might be clueless and doesn't even feel threatened with his act. He told her to forget what happened, and this will also be the only time he'd let her go scot-free. She should just go home and stop playing pranks by spying on people. So as Han Feng took a step forward, he was, again, surprised when the young girl grabbed hold of his jacket. Turning his head, he questioned what her deal was. What did she want? But as she still chose to just stare at him, Han Feng told her to stop staring and just say what she wanted. Otherwise, he would leave. He didn't have the patience or the luxury of trying to figure out why she would spy on a complete stranger up the flight of stairs in the middle of the night under such weather. This time around, the girl just pointed in a direction ahead of her, and again, without uttering a word. "Do you want me to come with you?" Han Feng questioned, and the girl replied with a slight nod. And with this, Han Feng followed her. And soon they came to a door which could be opened automatically, provided you've been authorized. Also, at the top right corner was a working surveillance camera. Seeing all this surprised Han Feng greatly, who couldn't help but wonder what was going on. Inside the apartment, although spacious, was untidy, with open boxes, clothes and other stuff littered everywhere. "Did you prepare all this?" The girl nodded again. It was in that moment that Han Feng came to the conclusion that the young girl might have known about the snowstorm, just like him. So he asked the young girl if she knew that there was going to be a snowstorm. To this question, the girl nodded again. Then, she finally spoke up. She said she knew there was going to be an ice age based on the calculations and result on the data she had. She then pulled her monitor on display to let Han Feng have a look. Seeing the chat ID in the homeowners chat group, Han Feng immediately knew who she was. So with a surprised look, he asked for a confirmation if the young girl was indeed mysterious person in the chat group. And as he got his affirmation, Han Feng was amazed. "But why did you bring me to your apartment? Did you bring me here just to talk about that?" Hearing the question, the girl just pointed to her numerous surveillance screens. And as Han Feng also turned to take a look, it was something he never could have imagined. On the screen were surveillance on his hoarding activities. Every single one, from the elevator to his apartment door, including the delivery and conversation with Li Zi. Everything he did was recorded in real time. At this moment, Han Feng felt a bit violated. His entire effort to hide his activities were a mere joke in the eyes of this little girl. "Have you been spying on me?" he questioned like it wasn't obvious at this point. Without hesitation, the girl nodded again. At this moment, the young girl had taken off her clothes, and what she currently had on was only her undergarment. Han Feng was dumbfounded, clueless as to why she would undress in front of a stranger. Then he began to blush in embarrassment, and in a panicked voice he shouted, "Hey, why are you taking off your clothes suddenly?" Hearing this, the girl simply replied in a calm tone that she was feeling hot. "No, that's not what I meant. What I meant to say was stop. Stop taking off your clothes and put your pants back on." At this point, it was evident that the young girl lacked the necessary social skills to behave or talk normally in front of other people. She got into comfortable clothes seconds later and began to use her computer. And as for Han Feng, he was still trying to process everything that has transpired so far. And after a few moments in thoughts, he asked, "Were you spying on me because you became suspicious of my behavior of hoarding supplies before the snowstorm?" And to this, the girl nodded. Han Feng then asked, "So approaching me earlier and monitoring me was mainly to confirm whether there is a possibility of cooperation between us?" Another nod followed when she heard the question. And with that, Han Feng then asked for clarification. What did she mean by cooperation? Hearing this, the girl simply put down her computer, got on fours on her sofa, and walked past Han Feng to the other end. Han Feng immediately panicked upon seeing this, and asked in a panicked tone what she was doing. The girl wheeled some sort of box at the other end of the sofa, totally clueless about personal space. Her actions were completely like that of a child. She then asked Han Feng to teach her how to operate a generator. So after what seems like forever, Han Feng successfully taught her how she could operate it on her own. Then, he asked her if there was anything else she needed help with. Hearing this, she simply pointed in the direction. Han Feng taught her how to use the geyser device. "You will get hot water by adjusting it in this way, but remember to close the valve after use," he said. Next was to properly pack her foodstuffs into her freezer. Raw meat must be placed in the freezer, and it must be unpacked. "You are being too reckless." Han Feng, struggling with the boxes, asked her to not just watch but offer a helping hand. When they were done, they moved to the kitchen. "Be sure to pay attention to safety when connecting gas, and read my steps carefully. Check if the meal is ready. If it's green, it's ready. Only when there is enough gas can the fire be big and the dishes cooked out be delicious." So, with the meal prepared and ready, Han Feng told her to always eat while the meal was hot under the current weather. Suddenly, all the frustration Han Feng had been feeling about his current situation finally got to him. So as he smashed the table in front of him in frustration, he couldn't help but feel like a babysitter. "Gosh, I feel like I'm a full-time babysitter. Your self-care ability is too poor." But to his surprise, the girl just stared and agreed with him. Seeing this, Han Feng immediately said that he was just kidding. He began to eat his meal while simultaneously crying inside about how tired he was. This girl seemed like a full-time job, so he decided to address the situation before things got out of hand. Han Feng turned to her and said, "Let me make this clear first. I will go back after eating." However, he was surprised to see that the girl had fallen asleep immediately after she finished eating. "Wow, even I can't fall asleep while eating," he said in disbelief. Han Feng carried and placed her sleeping figure on the sofa, then covered her with a blanket. After that, he got his jacket and quickly made his exit, commenting that the experience felt like he was raising a baby. A while early the next day, Han Feng, who happened to be asleep, heard a knock on his door. When he opened his door, it was none other than the young girl. In front of her were some boxes she brought for Han Feng. Han Feng thanked her for her generosity, but also figured out that she needed something from him as well. The girl also happened to have wheeled her generator there as well, so she asked Han Feng to teach her how to operate it once more. They went to her apartment, and after a few days of contact, Han Feng was sure that the girl who lived upstairs from him was an absolute idiot in life. A lot of common sense was also very lacking, and this made living with her a nightmare. But at least she seemed to want to learn about life. But the problem was that Han Feng kept being dragged to her home every day to teach her, like, everything. Her cooking skills, although extremely poor, seemed to have improved. But even with this kind of meal, many people would still rush to eat it. But then again, under normal circumstances, I guess even dogs wouldn't eat it, he thought. It was in this moment that Han Feng finally realized that he hadn't asked for her name. So when he did, she replied that it was the evil king's true eye envoy, like some video game character. Hearing this, Han Feng questioned himself why he even asked. After all, this girl seems like a handful, and apart from having keen observational skills and being smart with computers, she seems like a total airhead when it comes to having survival skills. Meanwhile, at the underground parking lot, it was absolute chaos. Everyone was fighting each other for resources, and from the looks of it, the committee's stability in maintaining order had evaporated as the homeowners tear each other apart for whatever resources were there. Each homeowner's eyes sparkled fiercely with fighting spirit. Though ragged and emaciated, they showed no trace of fear, and were armed with iron rods and kitchen knives, as they fought each other to death for what little resources available. Dark blood splattered on the clothes and the shoes of Glasses Man as a neighbor nearby was smacked on the cheek. The entire parking lot was like hell on earth, and Glasses Man, who happens to be the only person there, not fighting for resources like the rest, just watch everything unfold expressionlessly. Knowing he needed to take action to control the chaos, Glasses Man took out a megaphone, turned it on and caused a loud noise that drew everyone's attention momentarily. The noise was so deafening that everyone covered their ears. After taking a deep breath, he spoke up immediately. "Have you guys had enough? Have you beaten each other enough?" And as he said this, he helped the guy who was smacked on the cheek from earlier to his feet. Then he questioned the crowd. "Don't you think it's ridiculous that you all are beating each other to a pulp because of the last few supplies?" Hearing this, the fatty in glasses from earlier retorted, calling Glasses Man out. "You still have the nerve to say that? It was you who proposed the donation of supplies. And now, my family only received a pack of instant noodles to survive on for a few days." Another added, agreeing with what Fatty in Glasses said. "Yes, if we don't grab the resources available now, we'll starve to death." When Glasses Man heard this, he replied in a convincing tone. "Well, it seems I have to sort it out for everyone then. The distributed supplies are not enough and the donated supplies are also running out, so even if we grab the last bit of supplies, it still wouldn't be enough to last long. So, just like I said earlier, it's ridiculous. Do you guys deserve to starve to death? Think about it carefully. Who caused this situation? You!" The person directly in front of him replied from the crowd. Hearing this, Glasses Man just continued calmly, answering that it wasn't him. And since everyone seems to have forgotten, he would have to help refresh their memory. A loaf of bread that originally cost a few yuan was raised to dozens or even hundreds of yuan by those who had ample supplies. And as he said this, he took a piece of bread on the ground and crushed it in front of the crowd. In order to squeeze you dry, a loaf of bread is even divided into 1/5 or 1/10 for auction. Finally, they succeeded in making a fortune from the disaster, and all at your expense. And not only did you spend all your money on this food, but also started an internal conflict over the last few supplies. Isn't this ridiculous? They are the ones who have more supplies but never donated. They are also the ones who maliciously raise prices. And in the end, everyone currently present in this parking lot are the ones who needs to starve to death. Is this fair? Isn't uniting during this snowstorm the most important thing for us to do? If it is, then why don't we do just that? Why don't we go up there and get back the supplies that belong to us? When Glasses Man finished his speech, a brief and complete silence ensues as everyone thought it over. He's right. It's not fucking fair. Why do they get all the benefits while we have to starve to death? That's right. At this point, the crowd was slowly being swayed by Glasses Man. All that was needed now was a little nudge to direct them towards the other homeowners with resources. And that's what he did seconds after. It's all their fault. They made us suffer like this. Immediately after those words were said, the crowd was completely united in attacking the homeowners they sold their supplies to, or any homeowner suspected to have kept their supplies and never donated. Damn it, not fair. We have to get our share of the supplies back. Yes, just take back what belongs to us. Satisfied with the current development, an obvious smile formed on the lips of Glasses Man, who had, once again, successfully convinced the crowd to do his bidding. But at this moment, Li Zi, who happens to be among the crowd, gathering information for Han Feng, turned his head from side to side, and foresaw the enormous shit show that was heading towards some of the homeowners upstairs with resources. These people have gone absolutely crazy, and he needed to notify his brother immediately, he thought. So with a serious look, Li Zi took out his phone and texted Han Feng. Meanwhile, the snowstorm outside had not even slowed down a little. It was as bad as before, and could only get worse and worse. However, inside Han Feng's apartment, he was completely passed out at this moment as his phone dinged a few times. So, as he woke up to check the messages, he wondered if it was from Li Zi. And indeed it was. Li Zi warned Han Feng of what has transpired in the underground parking lot. "Brother, something bad has happened. These people had gone crazy," he said. "They're planning on raiding the homeowners upstairs with supplies." Curious, Han Feng asked who Li Zi meant by they? And who? That guy named Zhang. He is inciting the owners to rob other people's supplies. They are picking the locks of every apartment. Reading this, Han Feng immediately got up from his sofa, scared shitless. He then asked for more details, like if they had already started or if they're armed. "Yes, they are all armed. Hide if you can, but don't confront them head on." Han Feng replied that he understood. And Li Zi should also be careful. Han Feng quickly went to check his door locks to make sure they were completely secure. Then, he went by the window to close the curtains. Han Feng didn't expect things to turn out like this. And although he's got 2 guns to deal with the crisis, it would be troublesome if this happens to be an organized action. Because once his supplies are exposed, he would face every crazy neighbor. And if that happens, he's afraid that everything he'd hoarded would be eaten till there's nothing left. In short, he had to make preparations first. Han Feng grabbed some tools, 2 fire extinguishers and a long cable, and immediately headed for his door. He attached the cables to the doorknob, and at the same time, completely insulated it with the help of a duct tape and an insulator. He also placed the 2 fire extinguishers near the door. So as Han Feng began to uncoil the cable, the lights in his apartment went off. In fact, the entire neighborhood was plunged into darkness. Soon, the neighbors began to complain, questioning each other if they had electricity. Now, with water and electricity cut off, and air conditioning or any heating systems no longer functioning, it was genuinely cold enough to kill. The homeowners suddenly turned to the property management team to complain, but soon found out that they had no signal. They also found out that the buildings around them were also plunged into darkness. Han Feng observed everything outside through his window. He knew that the snowstorm, together with the overload of electricity for heating, would eventually cause an inevitable power outage. In addition, the snow and low temperature outside made it impossible to repair the equipment. Han Feng decided to use his home generator he had in advance. So with maximum effort, Han Feng refilled his home generator with gasoline. Han Feng also knew that the power outage and internet outage may be permanent. And when the other homeowners finally realized that the electricity would no longer be restored, panic would surface, and their panic may lead to more serious riots, and then, inevitably, absolute chaos where the entire neighborhood would plunge into a scene similar to the law of the jungle. Survival of the fittest. And that's when the real hell would begin. Half an hour ago, Hyona had been fortunate enough to find someone to feed her. At this moment, she was impatiently munching on a bowl of instant noodles. The guy explained to Hyona that he bought all the supplies from the homeowners in the group chat at 50 times the market price. And those poor idiots wouldn't shut up about how good of a deal it was for them. He spent more than 500,000 yuan on these supplies. He also put some of the supplies up for auction, and those poor people rushed to buy from him, so he made a small profit in the end. The guy then touched Hyona's cheek and asked her, "How about it? Are you willing to follow me?" Knowing it was time to put on an act, Hyona nodded in agreement that the guy was right. Seeing this, he thought that as long as he has supplies, he could do whatever he wanted with Hyona from now on. But at that moment, he heard noises from outside his apartment door. Then, soon after, he saw that someone was trying to pick his door lock. The guy stood up, frustrated, and wondered just who could be making noise outside his apartment in the middle of the night. He was totally unaware that the neighbors had all decided to raid his supplies at this moment. He soon heard the homeowners murmuring from the other side of his door, plotting about how to break into his apartment, and if it was indeed the apartment of the person who bought all their supplies. When the lock-picking seems not to be working, they decided to kick the door open. The door eventually gave way, freaking the guy out, who stared nervously ahead in disbelief. And at the door were the homeowners with their hungry faces and weapons.